August 27th meeting of the Planning Commission. If you would like to join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. Okay. Good morning, everyone. Ms. Opland, would you grace us with the TV coverage announcement?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Planning Commission hearings are televised live on County Santa Barbara Television, CSB TV, Channel 20, at 9 o'clock a.m. in the South Coast, Lompoc, San Ynez Valley, Santa Maria, and Orchid areas. Rebroadcasts of Planning Commission hearings are on Fridays at 5 o'clock p.m. on CSB TV, Channel 20. And for the roll call, Commissioner Brown?
Here.
Commissioner Blau?
Here.
Commissioner Cooney?
Here.
Commissioner Valencia?
Here.
And Commissioner Jackson?
Here.
Thank you.
Just stays on.
Okay. And Ms. Black, can you give us an agenda status report?
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the commission in both locations. This morning we have a consent agenda item on your agenda and two permit items, an appeal that's been continued, and then a recorded map modification. And our final item of the day is the housing element amendment related to Isla Vista. And I believe we're ready to move forward on all those items.
Okay, I think perhaps just as a point of reference for Commissioner Blau and Commissioner Valencia, the microphone on your desk is very, very sensitive. And just so you are aware of that, as it's picking up every sound from in there.
We'll turn ours off except when we're going to talk. And if you don't mind, especially staff, you need to get real close to the mic. I could just barely hear Ms. Black this morning.
Okay. Kind of keep us apprised as we go along, okay? All right, at this, we're ready, Ms. Black, to go to our projection report.
Yes, is this mic better?
Yeah, that's great. Thanks.
Okay, good. I think this one doesn't work very well. Okay, moving to the projection report, Mr. Chair. Next week, September 3rd's hearing has been canceled, so we'll have no Planning Commission meetings next week. September 10th will be your next regularly scheduled meeting, and that is a reasonably full meeting in Santa Maria. The next time the commission will meet is September 24th, so you'll have another week off while the Montecito Planning Commission meets September 17th. And that hearing is scheduled for Santa Barbara. It's a relatively short hearing at the moment, and Commissioner Brown will not be present at that meeting. You can see on your projection report, we had projected a special hearing on the Lompoc Wind Energy Project for September 30th, which is a Tuesday. In Santa Maria. We are looking into whether or not the room would be available on October 1st, the Santa Maria hearing room. And if it is, I think we will just conduct the Lompoc Wind hearing on October 1st and forego the special hearing. There's only one half-hour item on October 1st. It is a Santa Barbara item, but I think we can hear it remotely if it needs to happen that day. So then, moving on into October, you and the Montecito Planning Commission have actually swapped hearing places in October. So Montecito will be meeting on October 8th. And then your commission had requested that instead of meeting on the 15th, that you meet on Friday the 17th. And that's a fairly important hearing because we do have the housing element focused rezone EIR on that day. So on October 17th, which is a Friday, we'll be hearing that as well as the request for initiation of the Hunter La Purisima general plan amendment and a small parcel map. And that's as far as we have items projected. We are looking still at potentially canceling the meeting on October 22nd, depending on how things unfold. And then you'll have a hearing on November 5th and November 12th will be in Santa Maria. December 26th is a hearing that's the day before November 26th is the day before Thanksgiving, so we typically cancel that meeting. It does not show up on your agenda. December 3rd, we're scheduling or projecting to have your Planning Commission holiday lunch. And then just 2 more hearings to get us through the year with both your commission and the Montecito Planning Commission. One item that I wanted to discuss with you regarding the projection report, and this really is into January. We are, I think the commission knows, the county as a whole is participating in a furlough program, and all of the employees in the county will be furloughing for 64 hours. The majority of those people in the county workforce will be furloughing those last 2 weeks in December to take advantage of the 2 holidays in the week of Christmas and New Year's. So, so we're going to essentially not, this building will not be open. We won't be preparing for your hearings in January. So we're still looking at whether or not we'll have a hearing the first week in January, if we'll maybe postpone for 2 weeks so that the hearing support staff can come back from the furlough and get ourselves prepared. So we'll have to monitor the work of the commission as this year progresses, but I just wanted to let you know in case you wanted to take some extended winter holiday time. That might be a good time as well. And like I said, within the next month or so, I think we'll know how we're going to treat that. So I think that's it on the projection report.
Commissioner Cooney.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Black, could you refresh my recollection why we're switching the 15th and the 17th of October?
Mr. Chair and Commissioner Cooney, my vague recollection is that we first looked at holding the hearing on the 15th, and there were some commissioners who had already made plans not to be present, and so that's why we shifted to the end of that week.
I can barely hear you, but I'll give you the reason. It's a personal favor to me, Commissioner Cooney.
Oh, from all of us to you, Commissioner
Yes, sir,
Black.
it is.
All right. That's all I needed to know.
Thank you.
Okay. Ms. Black, and if this is not the appropriate time to ask this question, I do have an issue in the 3rd District with regard to the Santa Ynez Airport and story poles, and perhaps you can help me fill in the blanks.
Sure. Mr. Chair, just one more item, and it's actually back to your agenda, because there may be questions about this. So after your hearing last week, we did send out a revised agenda indicating that the Santa Barbara Ranch project was not going to be heard today. And I made that announcement at the end of the hearing last week when your commission took action. We did have a placeholder on today because we weren't sure if the commission was going to conclude the business on that item last week, so I just wanted to point that out. As to the Santa Ynez Airport, my understanding is that the airport went to the Central BAR recently in the last week or so, and the BAR requested that the airport install story poles for their structures before the environmental hearing on the proposed negative declaration. It's my understanding that those story poles will go up on September 4th and will be up for about a week. Staff is going to confirm that, and we'll send out notices to the Central BAR members as well as to your Planning Commission so that you can go visit the site if you choose.
Commissioner Brown?
Will there be pictures taken of the story poles?
Yes.
Okay, so we'll have that for the record, too.
Yes.
Thank you.
Ms. Black and fellow commissioners, the public comment period, I believe, closes on the 12th of September. And so there is interest in the Santa Ynez community that those story poles be there, and I only wish to suggest to my colleagues that if they want to get a chance to see them, because it is likely that those issues will be discussed after the close of the public comment period, whenever it is agendized. And since there's a little bit of a tight time frame there, that's why I wanted to make sure that it was brought forward. Commissioner Cooney.
Oh, Mr. Chair, didn't realize I still had my light on, but I would note that for Commissioner Brown and I, at least, those story polls would apparently be up then on the day of our Santa Maria hearing on the 10th of September, so we should be able to get by and see those.
Okay. Moving along, we've completed the work on the projection report, so at this juncture, I'll invite public comment on items not on our agenda. Before I go forward with that, I'd like to make one admonition to the audience that if you possess a cell phone at this time, to please put it to silent or vibrate or perhaps turn it off so that we can keep our focus on what's happening. I have 3 speakers slip which appear to for public comment. And I'll begin with Mr. Thorndike, and we'll allocate a normal 3 minutes. Good morning.
Good morning to you, sir, and to the board all around. I have a simple question, and I encourage answers. Either my property is 1/2 mile long, as the county has sent me 2 4-page letters explaining it is 1/2 mile long, or it is 1/4 mile long, as the court mandated it in 1992. Now, I don't really have any objection to the county's saying the final rule on this. The court had its chance, that is the court of in the city, and all the way to the Supreme Court, and in Supreme Court they said they lost the jurisdiction to the public whose vote was in favor of me, is what it amounted to. Now, what we're talking about is Proposition 99 in the last ballot election. Now, it's back, the ball is back in the county's hands for this great opening window of opportunity. Don't force me to take it to the federal court to get a decision, please. I've been strapped for a long time in a fixed position, can't sell my property, can't borrow against it, thank God. But it keeps me in poverty. So let's see if we can get me out of that. What is the answer to that question, please, all of you?
And as I believe we discussed earlier, this may not be the proper venue for answering questions or addressing your particular issue. I would encourage you perhaps to seek elsewhere within the county, and perhaps after the meeting or in a break at some time, perhaps we could assist. I off the top of my head, I don't know. But I appreciate your concerns. I thank you for sharing them. And I wish you the best of luck. And if we can find the appropriate venue for you to go, we'll try and do so. As I said offhand, I don't know the answer to that question. So unless my fellow commissioners have a question or wish to try and answer it, thank you very much. And we'll move on to Susan Petrovich.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the commission. As someone who spends a lot of time sitting in these chairs out here, I know the condition. I notice the condition as time progresses. And 10 years ago, I started a campaign to have the chairs replaced because now the springs are breaking down and they are very uncomfortable. Last time, it took, I think, someone's suit being torn before they finally were replaced. So this is my initial foray into a request that perhaps during the Christmas break, as they did 10 years ago, we replace these chairs or have them refurbished so that people can sit in them comfortably, particularly for your more lengthy hearings. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Lee Moldaver.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I am Lee Moldaver. I've been coming to these hearings about as long as Susan has, so I'd like to second her request. If there's any money left during the furlough, that would be a wonderful holiday surprise, I think, for all of us. You know, people don't appreciate how hard you work or how much reading you have to do or how many complex issues you have to see or how many moving targets you have to try to hit as projects morph and morph and morph over time. And as you look down, some of you have been here longer, as Mr. Black knows, the changing parade of staff faces and people you come to rely on, and suddenly they're gone or transferred or doing other things. And I've always admired how well the commission generally does its work. So I feel a little bit awkward today asking you to think back to last week's meeting on a very large, complex, momentous topic, and considering that the 20-year time frame that you gave to Mr. Osgood is twice as long as they gave the developer of the Bacara, and the fact that the TDR, TDC that you passed along to the board has no funding mechanism, and it's voluntary, and therefore it isn't worth the paper it's written on, and it's a fig leaf for people up on the 4th floor. But people watching on TV saw you move it along. And I would hope, Mr. Chair, that you would think back on the vote to bifurcate the project, where it's come down all the way through from David Yeager's time when Joan Wells was up here as a single project, and suddenly it was bifurcated. And I would hope that the three of you here, with no disrespect to my friends in the North County, would think about that 20-year window and think about that TDR, TDC, which isn't what the paper is written on, and think about how, at the last moment, as a gift to the applicant, you chose not to look carefully at the advice you got from your staff and your legal counsel. And I would ask whether there's someone here who would have the moral courage, unlike the President of the United States, to say, you know, this was tough, this was hard, we were tired, we might have made a mistake. I would like to ask my colleagues to consider reconsideration on those 3 points. And obviously it has to be someone who voted in the majority. So for the TDR, TDC, or the 20-year window, it would have to be either Commissioner Cooney or Chair Jackson. And obviously for bifurcating the project, it would have to be the chair. And you guys work hard. You've done wonderful things. This is a special site. I would really ask you to dig in your heart and really ask yourselves whether you did the best you could at last week's hearing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I believe we'll probably move on. I appreciate the comment. I will second the notion that it was complicated and hard work, and that is precisely why I agreed to participate in this, and I thank you for the perspective. However, I also have great respect for the hard work that my colleagues and staff and all who put into that, and I think it's ready to move on to its next step. Thank you, and we will, Commissioner Cooney, if you would like to comment.
Mr. Chair, I'd just like to clarify for the record that as to the TDR vote, I did vote against that particular item. So I wouldn't want Mr. Moldaver or anyone else to assume I was in the majority on that issue.
Okay, again, thank you, but I do believe we will continue with today's agenda. With probably one last thought is, I, for one, review in my mind every decision that we make on a regular basis, and it is my dedication to be confident and secure in any decision that I do make. And as a result of that, I am prepared to move forward. I have 2 more speaker slips. Oh, these are for item 1. I'm sorry. Okay, I believe then, unless there are any additional speakers toward public comment, I don't believe there are any up in Santa Maria at this point. That being the case, I will bring it back to the commission and ask if my colleagues, at this point, close public comment, and I'll ask my colleagues if they have any commissioner informational reports. And Commissioner Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's not so much an informational report, but, excuse me, a request for information from Ms. Black. There's a couple projects that have sort of come to my consciousness based upon either site visits or information that I've seen from other bodies, and the first is on St. Athanasius and its annexation into the Goleta Sanitary District. And I guess I would just like a recap of sort of what happened to that project, not today, but sometime in the future, so that we can understand the planning implications of what occurred with that project. I'm not fully sure I understand, but I don't even know if it would have made any difference if we had that information when we heard the project, but it would be sort of helpful to know in retrospect what occurred. And also, during my site visit yesterday for a project we're hearing today, I drove by Park Hills Estates, and in my mind, when we went through that project, I thought it was very well done, very detailed. The planner did an outstanding job, and it seemed to me that there was to be a detention-retention basin on that site. And I see the lots are for sale, but I don't, and maybe it wouldn't be obvious, but I didn't see any retention-detention basin, and I didn't know sort of where in the project phasing that might be or what's happening. So if you could just bring the commission up to date, because I think there was a lot of native grasses and some biological resources in that site, and we took great pains to have it fenced and all other issues. If we could just get an update on that as well. Thank you.
Okay. Commissioner Blau or Commissioner Valencia, do you have any commissioner informational reports?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I have something. Sometime back, about a month ago, I asked for a briefing on water, and I was told by the staff that they were preparing something. And as I look at the 6-month forecast, I don't see anything about any briefings coming up in the future. And I understand that you have to plan for these things, but after about a month, we should have some kind of a plan of when we have something planned for presentation.
Mr. Chair, I should have pointed this out in the projection report, but we are bringing a state water briefing to the commission on September 24th.
Thank you.
Sure.
Okay. Any further commissioner divisional briefings? Okay. Are there any P&D divisional briefings at this point?
No, Mr. Chair.
Okay. We have two sets of minutes in our packet, the minutes of August 5th, 2008 and August 13th, 2008. I'll entertain a motion to approve, beginning with August 5th, to either approve or amend said minutes, and I'll look for a motion.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes of August 5th.
Okay, we have a motion on the floor to approve the minutes of August 4th. It is in need of a second.
Second.
I have a second from Commissioner Cooney. Any discussion, amendments, or changes that anyone wants to discuss to August 5th? Okay, seeing none, Ms. Hopland.
Commissioner Brown?
Aye.
Commissioner Blau?
Aye.
Commissioner Cooney?
Aye.
Commissioner Valencia?
Aye.
Commissioner Jackson?
Aye.
Vote carries 5-0.
And we'll look to the minutes of August 13th, and I'll ask again for a motion either to amend or to accept the minutes as presented.
Motion to approve as submitted.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any discussion on August 13th? Seeing none, Ms. Hopland.
Commissioner Brown?
Aye.
Commissioner Blau?
Aye.
Commissioner Cooney?
Aye.
Commissioner Valencia?
Aye.
Commissioner Jackson?
Aye.
Vote carries 5-0.
Okay. Ms. Black, do we have a director's report for today?
Mr. Chair, yes, I'll be giving the director's report. Mr. Baker's on vacation. First of all, the California County Planning Commissioners Association is holding their annual state conference October 24th and 25th in Bakersfield. And the topic is land and water planning. So I want to let the commission know, October 24th and 25th. And I think that the registration deadline is October 6th. So if there are any planning commissioners who wish to attend this conference, they can let us know, and we'll get you signed up for it. And if you'd like to see the brochure on it, we can make that available to commissioners. You've got it. Okay.
Okay.
Okay, now, the board's back in session, and there's been quite a few things occurring at the Board of Supervisors, so I thought I'd spend just a couple of minutes and update the commission on that. First of all, the board had a special hearing on Gaviota preservation issues on August 18th, and that was a pretty well-attended board meeting. They received a report from a number of different parties and then took a pretty significant amount of public testimony. At the conclusion of the hearing, the board did direct the county executive office to work with long-range planning on a estimate and description of what it would take to prepare an update to the Gaviota Coast area, essentially a community plan for that area. They certainly didn't direct that work occurred, but asked that we prepare a tentative budget and have that as a consideration in our work program for next year, which we typically take to the board in early on in the year to help us in our budgeting. The board also, and I forget the exact language, I'm not sure I've seen the exact language, encouraged the nonprofit community to continue to work on securing funds for conservation easements and purchases of property on the Gaviota Coast as well. And I'm sure this item will continue to be a focus as we discuss coastal impact assessment program monies and CREF monies and other sources of funds that the county has control over as well. So, so that occurred on the 18th. Last week, the Board of Supervisors continued the appeals that they were scheduled to hear on the PXP Tranqueon Ridge project, and those appeals will now be, or are now scheduled to be heard on September 9th up in Santa Maria. Yesterday, you may have watched some of the board's hearing. Essentially, what was scheduled as a 2-hour item became a 12-hour item on the energy briefing issue. The Board of Supervisors, at the conclusion of a very, very long hearing with probably 80 to 100 speakers and some very thoughtful presentations by members of the industry as well as members of the environmental community, did vote 3-2 to send a letter to the governor requesting that he support exploration of oil and gas offshore California. The two members of the board that did not support that motion, I believe, voted to send their own letter as well, or intend to send their own letter as well. So it was a very interesting day. The more interesting thing than the result of the hearing really was just the information that was gathered as part of the hearing. And if you have had an opportunity to watch it, I think it was worthwhile. If you didn't, you might want to try and at least watch pieces of it on rebroadcast. I think Mr. Anthony did a very nice job at the beginning of the hearing, sort of giving a setting on the energy situation in terms of both oil and gas development and alternative energy in the county and state and country. So it was pretty interesting. Diamond Rock, fortunately, there were 3 other items scheduled for yesterday at the Board of Supervisors, and they were either disposed of quickly or continued. The first item that was continued was the Diamond Rock appeal that was to be heard yesterday, and it was continued to September 16th with the blessing of both parties. And I think the intention now is that the parties will try a facilitation to see if they can resolve their differences. This is the appeal that was filed by the Cuyama citizens. The other appeal filed by the Ojai citizens was already resolved. The building codes and fees were on the board's hearing yesterday, and they did have an opportunity to take that up briefly. They passed the first reading and set it for a second hearing on September 16th, although I think there may be a bit more discussion than is typical of a second hearing, because several of the board members didn't feel like they knew quite enough about it to get all the way there, so they abstained. And then finally, the solid waste thresholds were also scheduled for yesterday at the board, and they were also continued to September 16th. Just two other hearings of note that are coming up at the Board of Supervisors. We do have, and they were mentioned this morning, the Naples Transfer of Development Rights Ordinance is scheduled to be heard by the board on September 16th. So that item is coming up fairly soon. And then we have tentatively set, and it's moved several times, but I think this may be where it's actually going to land, the Santa Barbara Ranch hearing, taking up the items that your commission acted upon last week at the Board of Supervisors at a special hearing on Monday, October 13th. So I just wanted to let you know that those two items were coming up as well, because I know
Yeah.
a lot of members of the public have been very interested in those.
I'm not sure, but I believe I read in one of the local newspapers they had actually published in October, a different date than the 13th.
Mr. Chair, there have been a number of dates that have been discussed. We initially asked for a special hearing on October 6th, and because October 7th is also a South County meeting, that's not exactly the most convenient thing for the North County board members. Then the board talked about October 7th, and now I think they're realizing that their schedule is really quite tight through the end of the year to get through some of the items that are stacking up. So they at least initially have set a special hearing. It could change, but just like to let people know at least the latest. That was announced at the board yesterday.
Okay. Commissioner Brown?
Is that Monday a holiday of some sort? Is there a holiday?
I think, Mr. Chair and Commissioner Brown, it might be Columbus Day.
Okay,
but we
so,
don't-
and that's
we don't
not,
get that.
okay, all right, fine, thank you.
The county
Okay.
doesn't
And it's not
observe.
one that normally people take off? Okay,
Well,
I don't know.
if I'm normal, no.
No, I mean, like, maybe the feds take it, but I don't.
I
okay.
think that it's
Okay.
a banking holiday.
Oh, okay, fine, all right, thank you.
As an ex-banker, it was a wonderful holiday, normal or abnormal. Commissioner Cooney?
Ms. Black, did you say where the location of that hearing is at?
The October 13th?
Yes.
It would be here in Santa Barbara.
Thank you.
And I guess I didn't finish my thought. So I think that the October 13th date works better because the October 14th hearing is in Santa Maria, so it's just a bit easier for the North County board members to conduct two hearings back-to-back if one is south and the other is north.
Do we do anything different proactively if we do know that one press outlet got it wrong? Just wondering. Okay.
They'll catch up.
By the way, just as an observation, I watched the meeting yesterday as well, and from both pro and con in the debate, both felt Mr. Anthony's report was something that needed to have more life than just that meeting, that it was particularly well-received, so kudos there. A lot of grading going on at that meeting, too. Okay, I think at this point we have a consent agenda item. And again, refresh my memory in following this because I do know that one of our commissioners will want to pull this item, so I want to follow procedurally the correct method. So,
Mr. Chair, I think the correct thing to do would be to have the item read into the record, and then you can ask if anybody wants to pull it. And
okay, knowing that that's the case, Ms. Hopland.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The following is the hearing on the request of Edward J. Bertling, agent for the Ripples Co. LLC, to consider case number 08-GOV-19, application filed on July 31st, 2008, for determination that the construction of an approximately 180-square-foot pet washing station adjoining an existing public restroom is consistent with the County of Santa Barbara Comprehensive Plan pursuant to Government Code Section 65402.
Okay, at this point, I believe it's correct that I ask if my colleagues would like to pull this item. Commissioner Brown?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Although it's not in my district, I would like to pull it because I have subsequently found out a lot of information about this, and I think it might be helpful for the public to know if the commissioners themselves don't know about this type of project or what is being proposed. Just, normally you wouldn't do this, but this is something unusual, so I think it'd be helpful.
Mr. Chair and Commissioner Brown, would you like then a brief staff presentation?
Yeah, and-
Dana Carmichael is available up north, and Juan Beltranena is
Right.
here, so
Great.
maybe Juan would want to
Yeah.
step to the podium and tell us what they've proposed.
We need to see a new face. It'd be nice, get Mr. Beltranena.
Mr. Beltranena works in the Parks Department.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, Commissioners.
Welcome.
I'm Juan Beltranena. I'm Project Manager for the Parks Department, and I'm here to answer your questions.
Well, please just tell us about what is being proposed here, how it works and what you're going to do and so on and so forth.
What is being proposed here is to provide a facility that gives additional services to our constituents in the form of a pet wash station. This facility has been tried elsewhere and has worked quite well. It's basically the equivalent of a car wash for pets, where you purchase a token, and then the equipment goes ahead and provides the necessary water, shampoo, and drying air for the pets to be washed, and comes in two flavors for large pets and for small pets.
But it's not the Parks Department that's operating this, there's a concessionaire, and would you explain that person's responsibility and so on and so forth?
That is correct. To the best of my understanding, the Parks Department is simply going to oversee this concession. A concessionaire is going to be operating the facility and maintaining it, and thus the impacts to the Park Department's personnel or the scope of the work that they normally conduct will be pretty much unaffected beyond the normal supervision duties.
And I think that we do, Mr. Bertling is in the audience. I wonder if any of the commissioners would like to hear from him to get more information.
Do any of my colleagues want, I would, if it can be brief, just to get an understanding.
Thank you.
Good morning. My name's Ed Bertling, and I'm the co-owner of Ripple's Pet Spas. And yes, if I could clarify any of your questions, I know
Just speak up, please, we can't hear you in the North County.
Okay, is that a little better?
Yes.
Okay, great. Just as Juan was saying, it's very similar to a car wash. It's an open area, and people will purchase, they can use credit cards or cash, purchase tokens, and then they can, it has, just like a car wash, switches. You go from rinse to shampoo, back to rinse, to blow dry. There'll be a deskunker, flea and tick treatment. But it's been well received. Everybody, I think, feels it's a real asset to the community, and we do maintain it and completely. And as far as the park services, they're going to be doing their normal supervision of their restrooms and that, and all it would be is there was some type of graffiti or something like that, they might call us. And we will be out we work 24/7.
Okay.
Any question?
Commissioner Cooney?
I do have a question. With regard to the facility itself, is it open 24 hours a day, or is it locked and unavailable during certain hours? I'd be concerned about unauthorized use or vandalism after
Well,
hours.
we've been in the car wash business for 10, 12 years, so it's there's nothing such thing as vandal-proof. We can say resistant. But it is open, but it's inside the park. The park closes, in the evenings, sunset to sunrise is the only time it's open. We should expect minimal problems with, homeless or those type of issues.
And it has a deskunking option?
Yep.
No tomato juice?
Nope. And all the products are earth-friendly.
Okay. Any other questions?
So you pay all the costs associated with the electricity and all that, and then the county collects a small fee from you depending upon the use and so forth?
Correct. We absolutely put all the costs to install it, maintain it, and then the park department gets a percentage of the gross sales.
Okay. By virtue of having read this, do we need to take a public comment at this time? I think you've answered our questions well. I will open, if there is someone in the audience who would like to speak to this issue to attract our attention at this moment and pass us a speaker slip. It looks like there isn't any additional public comment on this item, so we'll come back to the commission. And I believe, unless there are any additional questions, I see Ms. Carmichael is up in Santa Maria, if there are any questions for her. Commissioners, your leave at this point.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I'm ready to make a motion on this item. I don't hear any conversation.
Then I think I'm ready to hear you make that motion.
All right, I move that we determine that the proposed self-serve pet washing station is consistent with a comprehensive plan, and that we transmit the consistency report required by Government Code 65402 to Mr. Edward Bertling, agent for the Whirlpools Company, and the Board of Supervisors. The memo dated August 27th, 2008, and a letter reflecting the Planning Commission's action shall constitute the required report.
I'll second it.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Is there any additional discussion? Seeing none, Ms. Opland?
Commissioner Brown?
Aye.
Commissioner Blau?
Aye.
Commissioner Cooney?
Aye.
Commissioner Valencia?
Aye.
Commissioner Jackson?
Aye.
Vote carries 5-0.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
At this time, I think we'll take a 5-minute break for setup for our next item. So. And my apologies for extending any more time in those seats. And we will, Ms. Opland, if you'll read the next item into the record.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The following is a hearing on the request of David Burke and Paul Cook, owners, to consider the appeals, case numbers 08 APL 17, appeal filed on May 2nd, 2008, and 08 APL 22, appeal filed on May 16th, 2008, and to accept the exemption pursuant to sections 15270, 15301A, and 15303E of the state guidelines for implementation of CEQA.
Okay. And barring any other insights, we'll begin with a staff report. Good morning and welcome.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, Commissioners. I'll provide just a verbal presentation. At the hearing of July 23rd, the Commission heard the appeal request for alterations to a single-family dwelling that included the conversion of a one-car garage and carport to two-car garage, and addition of a 1,000-square-foot basement, changes to driveway alignment, exterior retaining walls, changes to the residence of windows, doors, chimneys, exterior walls, and interior floor plan changes. The Commission conceptually denied the appeal with respect to the conversion of the carport to two-car garage and basement addition, and conceptually granted the appeal with respect to changes to the driveway alignment, exterior retaining walls, changes to the residence of windows, doors, chimneys, exterior walls, and interior floor plan. The Commission directed the project to return to SBAR for review of the conceptually approved changes to the residence, and return to the Commission with revised findings and conditions of approval. On August 8th, SBAR reviewed the proposed alterations, including a minor change in elevation of an exterior window on the north side of the residence, Staff has prepared a memo outlining the SBAR comments and the revised staff recommendation. Of 2 minor revisions to the memo. On council's recommendation, we would like to amend the CEQA exemption to include additional grounds for exemption. CEQA guidelines section 15301A pertaining to interior and exterior alterations to existing structures. Also, Environmental Health Services staff have contacted me indicating that the septic system would need to be reevaluated as a result of the proposed basement, and we do not at present have enough information to determine consistency with the requirement of adequate infrastructure. The consistency analysis will be revised to include that information. Staff's revised recommendation is that the Planning Commission adopt the findings for approval in part and denial in part of the project as revised, accept the CEQA exemption, grant the portion of the appeals pertaining to the changes of the driveway alignment, exterior retaining walls, changes to the residence of windows, doors, chimneys, exterior walls, and interior floor plan, and deny the remainder of the appeal pertaining to the conversion of the carport and 1-car garage to 2-car garage and the basement addition. This concludes staff's presentation.
Okay, are there any commissioner questions for staff at this point?
Yes, I have one.
Commissioner Blau?
I just want to know, this is half of, not half, but there were 2 projects, and somehow they got separated, coming back to us for the second reading. I just want to know if the first one did appeal to the board, or if their appeal period has expired.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Blau, the appeal period has expired and there was not an appeal filed to the board.
Okay.
Okay, are there any additional commissioner questions for staff at this point? Okay, I think it's customary to have an applicant presentation at this point. Is there a presentation from the applicant? And can you give me an estimate of what your time frame needs will be?
About 30 seconds. We have nothing new to add. We're in agreement with the motion. We've eliminated the basement, and which I think takes care of this whole septic issue. And the only other thing that the BAR added was a small planter along the base of the walls going into the driveway to sort of soften the whole planter. So we've agreed to that as well. So we agree with all the changes, and I think so does BAR.
Okay, any questions for the applicant? Okay, seeing none, I think at this time it would be prudent to take public comment. I believe we have some speakers, and I'll make sure that I'm allocating speakers that are specific to this issue, because I do have Ms. Petrovich, Mr. Burke, who just spoke. And Ms. Petrovich, do you wish to speak to this, or do you want to wait till the back end?
Yes, Mr. Chair, if that would be okay with you, I'd like to just hold my comments, if I make any, as a response to any public comments.
Okay,
Thank you.
then I'll begin. I have a speaker slip from Ginger Sledge, followed by Mary Lee Nathan, and then Jim Chard.
Hi, I'm Ginger Sledge, and good morning, commissioners. And I'm going to be extremely brief, because you've already gotten a readful from me, a letter explaining why we respectfully request that you uphold your denial of the basement and the conversion of the trellised park space for a garage. I also just want to say one thing, though. I have also been in touch with the Environmental Health Services Department, and I didn't have a chance to see the revised movement of the walls that have been approved for this constrained site, this Lot 2, and I only have a copy of what was approved, and Eric only has a copy of what was approved. And after talking to Environmental Health Services, they were interested to find out if the movement of any of the exterior walls came closer to the septic system, as there has to be a certain amount of feet between the two, and the site's so constrained that everybody agrees that everything's shoehorned in there. And I don't know if this shows on that. I was going to just show you the site really quickly, and then I'll be done. don't know how this works, but the top, oh, there we go. Okay. So the top lot, which shows, this is the top lot, which is 7,900 square feet. Here's what the original wall, the exterior walls right here were, and here's the dry well, and here's the primary dry wall and an expansion, dry well and an expansion dry well. The concern is if these exterior walls were moved any closer to this, there would be a problem, mostly for the house, but also possibly for slippage of this site. Mostly for the house now that there's no basement, just because any kind of failure of this system would actually go under the foundation, and they were just concerned the foundation would be too close. And I can't remember off the top of my head what the state guideline is, but I think it's 8 to 10 feet, but I just can't remember. But so that would just be, you'd probably want staff to look at that. That's it. Okay?
Okay.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Okay, Mary Lee Martin, followed by Jim Chard.
Good morning, Commissioners. I'm very brief, and I'm very thankful that our new neighbors have gone back to the original compromise that we had many, many months ago, and that, so I'm here to say I'm pleased with the results that have happened. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Jim Chard, followed by Dennis Allen.
Commissioners, Chair, thank you for giving us this time. I just want to say I'm glad that this is upheld and everything that's being done, that this is not going through the denial for the basement. I mean, we've endured quite a bit in this, and you guys have seen that in the letters and the people that have been here, you know, the false statements, the empty promises, physical confrontation, intense building, 9,000 square feet on less than an acre. The many meetings, you know, the movement of personal property without signed approval. It's just been unbelievable. And the reason we're here is because, you know, progress is inevitable. But progress without respect for the neighbors, without respect for the neighborhood, without respect for the rules, is not progress done correctly. And that's why we're here. We appreciate everything you've done. We appreciate that you're upholding the denial. And I thank all of you for being with us on this journey.
Okay, thank you very much. Dennis Allen, followed by Jenny Cushney.
Good morning, Commissioners. One of the neighbors across the street and also a general contractor. We've had, I think it's 16 or 17 meetings total that have been before SBAR and the Mission Canyon Review Board. More than 10 of those meetings have been with the SBAR sessions. And during those meetings, there were a number of concepts talked about and principles that were explored, and after much deliberation and input from various sides, basically agreed upon. And there's two I want to focus on very briefly. One was the massing of the structures on the projects, and that's one of the reasons that the SBAR and the community supported so strongly having these as carports and not enclosed garages. One carport, one enclosed garage for each of the structures on the lowest part of the overall parcel. The second principle that was so important was trying to retain as much of the stormwater on site as possible. This is increasingly a principle that is important countywide, not just in Santa Barbara, but it's a principle that's being given increasing attention nationwide because of water issues, getting more water back down into groundwater tables, keeping runoff from getting out into our oceans and causing increased pollution. And this is a principle that was explored over a number of meetings and was talked about, and there was agreement by the applicants, the developers, that there would be a considerable amount of stormwater retainage on the site. Most of that has disappeared in the course of things, and one compromise that was actually made was that we probably couldn't have that in the driveways because of fire truck access and so forth, and needing really strong surfaces there, and that was accepted by, I think, all parties. But one of the things that was very clearly agreed upon at one of the SBAR meetings towards the end of the process was that the carports, these two carports, would have permeable surfaces beneath them as part of, again, trying to retain as much water on site. And not only was the retention on site important for the reasons I mentioned, but this is a special problem district in the upper end of Mission Canyon, and water runoff problems have occurred in this neighborhood. We're part of that, and we've seen these problems. When we get some of the heavy storms, the sites just don't handle all this water. So maximizing that, and this is a principle all of us in the neighborhood have tried to take care of increasingly on our own properties, is try to keep as much water there as we can so we minimize the overtaxation of the existing stormwater systems that are trying to handle this. So this is one thing that got lost between the decisions at the SBAR, where it was very clearly a decision and supported by, I think, all parties at that time. But now those surfaces for those carports are on the plans, the approved sets of plans, as impermeable. And the reason that I'm so clear that this was a violation, it was a change from the decision of the board, is because my wife and another neighbor went back and re-listened to all of the tapes of those SBAR meetings. They spent about a day and a half going through every one of them and reviewing all the minutes. And some of the minutes didn't reflect all of this, but this was very clearly a principle. And I think I would urge the commission to resubstantiate that and make that a part of the conditions if you deny the approval to change these from carports into garages, which I think they should be. And that impacts both of these issues that I mentioned, the massing, because it reduces the massing by having them as carports rather than garages. And secondly, it will assist even more trying to keep that groundwater, the storm runoff on site. So thank you for your attention.
Okay, thank you very much. Commissioner Brown has a question for you, sir. Sir?
Yeah, excuse me. I guess maybe it is a question and a comment, but, it's interesting when we've had our stormwater briefings and when we take a look at projects where there are, I don't think in this jurisdiction I've seen one, but another jurisdiction where we see trash containers, where we see gas stations, is that the material upon which the elements rest is all impermeable because they don't want the gasoline and the oils to seep into the ground. So they prefer, I believe, when they design these bigger kinds of projects, are impermeable surfaces. So I think it's interesting that you had this discussion at the SBAR about having it permeable under cars, because that's sort of, I'm just wondering if there's been any discussion about how contrary that might be to stormwater pollution issues.
That was not specifically addressed, from my recollection, at any of these meetings. It's quite amazing, though, what soils and natural plants and processes can do to even break down some fairly toxic materials. This is an increasing area of attention, and we've seen this in some of the wastewater natural treatment systems. So it's not an impossible result to achieve with that. But I think there would be fairly minimal oil spillage. I mean, most of us try to take care of our cars, and so anyway. But I think it's I think the retention of water on site is an overriding issue. Thank you.
Thank you. Jenny Kushney, followed by Michael Mattioli.
Good morning, Commissioners. I'm the wife that listened to all the tapes again with Ginger Swedge. And there was a good point you raised, but because we were confused when we heard that what the applicants were asking for was just a garage door, that they were talking about roofs and already walls, and they were only adding a garage door to make this carport into a garage. We thought, no, that's not what the SBAR was talking about. When we were at all those meetings, it was just a surprise. So we went back and listened, and indeed, on every plan and every meeting, it was described as parking space with a trellis. And right up to the last meeting in the notes, it's still a parking space with trellis. The issue of permeability was, as you've heard, really high on the SBAR's agenda, that to have this site be as permeable as possible. Now, what you raise about having an impermeable surface for under a car, but it's still going to, if there's water coming in from the top, that's still going to wash whatever onto the surrounding area. So whether it's permeable or impermeable doesn't really change, the pollution that will happen in that area. And as I say, we would really like to see, the other thing we found interesting was that, and I think Ginger noted that Mr. Burke said when he was asked by the SBAR, that all surfaces on the site were permeable except for the driveway. But then when we looked at the plans, indeed, there was a slab under the trellis. So for us, there's a question about process and how things get transferred, in these complex meetings, how things get transferred to plans and to the final plans and who's looking. And there's so many details that, and one of the other things that we've noticed was at the SBAR meetings, often it's the applicant that is asked to tell somebody in some other, like flood control, will you please relay to flood control that this is our concern? Now, it's not that these are bad people, that they're deliberately lying, whatever. That's not it. It's like when you're asked to convey something, clearly your own bias is going to be uppermost, and you're going to convey the message in a way that plays down maybe the significance for the other group. So it's just that, for us in Mission Canyon, there are issues much bigger than this case, but this case is very illustrative of what some of the problems are in dealing with Mission Canyon. That the Special Problems Committee is the group where all these different agencies meet together, and it should be the arena where there's discussion and back and forth, but usually that meeting is right at the beginning of the process when people don't know the complexities. They haven't had the 15 meetings yet. And then there's no going back to the group where there's a whole group of now experts who have had time to hear the details from each other, instead of each one just marking off, fine, on their checklist and saying this project goes ahead and it's fine. So that's one issue that comes out of this that is greater than just this project that probably needs to be looked at by this commission and the Board of Supervisors. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Michael Mattioli is my last speaker on this item.
Thank you very much, Commissioners and Chair, for the opportunity to speak. Our neighbors have addressed these issues really eloquently, and I would like to add that this process has been a real eye-opener for all of us. Our first BAR meeting for this project was August 2005. So, to fill in the gaps of where some of these misunderstandings and things that go by the board, it's kind of easy to see when you see the turnover in personnel and staff positions and the lengths of times between the meetings, and all of those things greatly contribute to this process not working to the neighborhood's, in my opinion, advantage. Every advantage is given to the applicant in this process. And for us, 3 years and like literally thousands of hours of time spent by the neighborhood, by members of the neighborhood, it's incredibly frustrating to be here 3 years later talking about a basement that wasn't on the plans when it was approved. I mean, it's an abuse of the process. And I think if anyone else is listening to this, these minutes from these meetings are crucial. If we could go back to the beginning of this process again, we would be having these minutes in full transcription at every meeting, because there is no way someone, any staff member or anyone else, can summarize what happened in these meetings in 3 lines and be accurate about it. And I think that's where there's a big gap in what I think is ultimately designed to be a fair process. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, I believe that is the last speaker slip I have on this item, so I will bring it back to the commission. Well, I see you in a different light, so I'm going to come back in just a moment. But, well, I suppose you got me. Yeah, Ms. Petrovich.
Hello, Dave Burke. I'm the architect. I'd like to, and owner of the property, I'd like to respond to several of the issues that were brought up. First of all, about the number of meetings. When you think about it, we had 3 separate lots here. If each one of those allowed 3 meetings per lot, we'd get 9 meetings just by process. So we were always required to lump this project into one project rather than 3 separate ones. So if most of them are like, if we'd gone in like we wanted to, at one point we tried to break it out into separate process each lot separately, which would have been 3 or 4 meetings per lot. That would have been just as many meetings. So I think that it's a little bit of a red herring to say that everybody's worked really hard, and nobody's worked harder than I have in responding to all these issues and changes that have been going on throughout the building, throughout the process. And I'm no happier than anybody to be here 3 years later. And the process works in the fact that when we did come back with this request for these new issues, it was a total new request based on changed conditions. So that's all part of the process as well. Now, in regards to the septic locations, the dry wells on this lot, that's correct. This house is shoehorned in amongst the dry wells, and that's why it has the odd shape it does. And the change in the walls actually pulls the house further away from the dry wells. So that's been a big issue. You have to be at least 8 feet away from the edge of the dry well, 10 foot to the center. So we've worked over and over again with the engineers and environmental health to make sure that meets all requirements. We took out the basement because of one of the issues. It doesn't work with the dry wells in that condition. Now, let's talk about stormwater runoff. In the first place, in my opinion, during the whole process, the carports were always part of the structural slab. I never intended them to be a permeable area because we have retaining walls on 2 sides, which leaves basically, by the time you're done with the retaining walls on the top and the right side, you end up with about 8 square feet of permeable along with the oil. It was never intended that be permeable, even though they want to have the trellis over the top. Early in the process, we had originally proposed to maintain all of our stormwater on site with retention basins on site. Our downstream neighbors didn't want another drop coming their way, and so we proposed put a new storm drain system in all the way over to Mission Canyon. So the deal was, it was a trade-off. Either we keep it on site with retention and basins and let it dribble out slowly, or we take all the drainage and move it and take it the other direction. So we've basically, our little project has solved a regional drainage issue there, and not only do we pick up all the drainage from our site, we pick up drainage from upstream, and we also put filters in the storm drain to filter out the organics going through it. So I think in that regard, we've done everybody a big favor in the neighborhood, particularly our downstream neighbors, in solving a big problem. And one of the issues with the soil up there, everybody talks about permeability, that's all fine and good, but that, I don't know if you've seen that soil up there, but it turns to grease when it gets wet. It runs right off. There is no permeable soil. And so, that's another red herring to talk about permeability up there, because all those sites up there run right off. And I think that, again, even though we are adding a certain amount of impermeable surface, we're taking care of that with the storm drain system that we installed. So that concludes my remarks.
Okay. Ms. Petrovich, did you want to add to that?
I just wanted to add two statements, Mr. Chair, members of the commission. Susan Petrovich, again, for the record. After seeing what these applicants went through, to hear Mr. Chard say that the rules weren't followed, I think was inappropriate, both as to the county and as to the applicants, because these applicants have followed the county's rules and procedures to the letter. That's why they came back with an appeal. Some people would have tried to do this, or with an application. Some people would have tried to do this as an as-built. They did not do that. They were very careful to follow every rule and regulation. And I guess I do have one other statement regarding the soils, and that is that the BAR was very clear that they understood that even as the driveway areas, because those soils are so heavy in clay, that all of the designations of impermeable surface would be subject to a soil engineer saying it was all right, that it could support load. So to expect these carports to be impermeable is unrealistic, to say the least. But that's really beside the point, because that was part of the final approval, and it makes absolutely no sense to require a carport to be a permeable surface. A person would be just driving literally into a clay bowl to park their car. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, at this point, I will formally bring it back to the commission, and if there are any additional questions for staff from commissioners, seeing none, Commissioner Cooney, this is in your district. Do you wish to indicate how we should proceed?
Mr. Chair, thank you. As Commissioner Blau noted a few minutes ago, this is our second hearing on this matter. We took a conceptual vote. I'd be prepared to move what staff has recommended on this hearing, and understand the applicant at this point accepts that result. But I'd prefer to hear comments from other commissioners before making the motion.
Okay.
First, if that's okay.
Commissioner Blau wants to go first.
Even though I voted against the appeal for the last one, the fact that the applicant is now satisfied with the conditions that are set, I'm going to go ahead and vote to approve the denial. I do have one other comment, though. One thing that bothered me when I did my site visit there was attempting to find the property, because the addressing is so poor in that area. And I did have maybe a question for staff. Do we have rules about how you address properties for the benefit of fire and other EMTs? I'm concerned that if I had difficulty finding it, what do you do with an ambulance or other emergency vehicles and trying to locate a particular residence? It just seemed to be a real problem in that area.
Okay. Ms. Black, or do you want to tackle that?
Mr. Chair, sure. The county fire department actually issues the street addresses for individual properties. They give the street address numbers, so they are aware of where the addresses are. In terms of road names, they also have conventions, and we have an ordinance that addresses the way roads are named.
If I may, because I had a similar problem, I think it's the demarcation, it's the indication of the address and site. It's not just how it's done, it's the fact that there's no physical information that shows exactly where it is. And I appreciate they're not finished yet, so there may well be a marker on the outside and, with an address that you could see. But I echo Commissioner Blau's concerns.
Okay, we are in the process of seeking comments. Commissioner Brown, do you want to?
Yeah, I have some other comments, Mr. Chair. It's really unfortunate that this process, A, has taken so long, and B, that it has been so contentious, and C, that we don't always get in BAR minutes what the community seems to remember occurred. As I look back over the minutes that we received, there's very little information about permeability or drainage of the site and stormwater management. And I think maybe that doesn't, while in fact there may have been a great deal of discussion, unfortunately it didn't make it into the minutes. And I'm always one for making sure that BAR minutes are clear and concise and capture what is done, because I think in this purpose it might have been helpful to some extent. Although I do agree with the applicant, I do think it's better to have a slab than to have some sort of permeable surface there, because I'm not sure what you would do with rain. It'd be pretty difficult. And I think, considering the other measures that the applicant is taking, that the stormwater management issues will certainly be minimized. I'm supportive of Commissioner Cooney's motion, and I'd be happy to second it. And I hope that with the changes that the applicant has made and he goes forward, that the neighbors will welcome him and that he will be a valued member of the neighborhood. So thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Valencia, I can't see real well over to you.
And that's real good, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I was prepared not to follow the commission's action here. I was prepared not to accept because I don't find that the comprehensive plan consistency is accurate in its calling one of the items as inconsistent. However, since the applicant has said that he will change and accommodate the planning commission's requirements and the people in the community, I'll just go and support the motion. But I felt that he had a legitimate claim on what he wanted to do, and I don't find anything in violation of any rule.
Okay, and for myself, I'm prepared to support Commissioner Cooney's motion. I would give a caveat to the response that be careful what you ask for, because you might get it, and I can imagine that the BAR process could become extremely cumbersome if it becomes documented, and so I think about it. My other comment on this is I'm grateful that the last word will come on this project, because I see a lot of angling and vying for it, and I really do hope that there will be peace at the end of it. I think, yes, it's a long time, but as the applicant pointed out, 3 houses, 3 per, there's a lot of process that would have been anticipated on that basis anyway. I think a lot of good has come from it. It certainly has educated me, and it has highlighted some rather key issues with the relationship between what is the purview of a BAR and what is the purview of a planning commission. I'm a little wary that flood control and permeability of soils is the purview of a BAR. I think that discussion probably does come here or at the staff level. So I'm satisfied. I'm ready to go.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and to all my fellow commissioners for their comments and consideration of this case. I think the neighborhood we're involved with here, and with which we'll be involved in hearings to come on a broader scale, deserved our time and attention. They certainly put in a tremendous amount of time and effort to express concerns. It happened that the vehicle through which those concerns were expressed is imperfect. It is our Board of Architectural review process. As everyone knows, I've been a strong advocate of that process because I think it does provide the first and best opportunity for neighbors to express their concerns about projects in their neighborhood. There are still some areas of the county and some projects which don't go through this process. And but by and large, the majority of projects where at least visibility is an issue are reviewed now by a local BAR. The architects who are really volunteers along with the other members of those committees are very conscientious in general. They put a lot of time in. In fact, I can remember discussing this specific project in the larger context of how should we be treating projects that are controversial at BAR, and it is possible to go on too long. And I think one of the improvements that's being made is that if the applicant is not pleased with the BAR direction after 2 or 3 hearings, it should be moved along either by approval or denial. And I think that will help to some degree. In this case, there may have been a miscommunication at the end as to how the plans eventually got finalized, but the fact is the plans were finalized, those permits were issued, those permits are not before us. What we're talking about is a new application the applicants were entitled to make based on new conditions. The commission has considered those new conditions in light of the application, and we've accepted many of the changes proposed, but there are a couple that, at least in my view, have merited denial of the appeal. And so the findings, the conditions, and the environmental review as outlined by staff, I think reflects the motion I'm prepared to make now. So I will, the recommendation, I'm not sure our North County colleagues can see it, but I'll just read it quickly. The motion is to adopt the findings for approval in part and denial in part of the project as specified in Attachment A, to accept the CEQA exemption as specified in Attachment B, and grant a portion of the appeals and deny the remainder of the appeals subject to the revised conditions of approval included as Attachment C.
Second.
Okay, we'll have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion from board members? Or commissioners, I should say. Okay, I don't see any, so Ms. Applin?
Commissioner Brown?
Aye.
Commissioner Blau?
Aye.
Commissioner Cooney? Commissioner Valencia?
Aye.
Commissioner Jackson?
Aye.
Vote carries 5-0.
Okay, we will take a 5-minute break to set up for our next item. Thank you. Of October. Ms. Oplin, would you read our next item into the record, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The following is a hearing on the request of Bob Easton, AIA, agent for owners Dorothy and John Skidmore, to consider case number 08RMM2, application filed on January 28, 2008, and to accept 00ND08 as adequate environmental review for case number TPM 14493 pursuant to section 15162 of the state guidelines for implementation of CEQA.
Okay, thank you very much, and good morning and welcome, and let's begin with a staff report.
Okay, good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the Commission. My name is Holly Bradbury, and I'm a planner in Development Review South. I've prepared a brief presentation today. The project before you is the Skidmore Recorded Map Modification.
Mr. Chair, you're not coming through. You're going to have to speak into the telephone, into the microphone.
Gotcha.
Okay, this project is located at 1230 San Antonio Creek Road, about 500 feet north of the intersection of La Riata Lane and San Antonio Creek Road in the Goleta planning area. The applicant is requesting the removal of the construction envelopes. The envelopes were originally created for the slot split to avoid biological resources and slopes. A biological study was recently completed showing that there are no biological resources on Lot 3. Therefore, the circumstances have changed. No slopes are present in the developable area of this lot. This corner lot has two primary front yard setbacks, one 20 feet from the private road driveway, as shown right here, 150 feet from the center line of San Antonio Creek Road. A 10-foot side yard setback exists and a 25-foot rear yard setback. Any development in the setbacks would need to meet ordinance requirements. Staff is recommending that you adopt the findings for this project, accept the previously approved negative declaration, and approve the project subject to conditions. Thank you, and that is the end of my presentation. Please let me know if you have any questions.
Okay, Commissioner Brown.
Ms. Bradbury, would you go back to the previous map where you showed the setbacks? And you described, is this basically what is in green? Oh, this is the envelope, right? Is that correct?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Brown, yes, this is the envelope to be removed.
Okay, and if it were to be removed, what does this mean? What would be the setbacks particularly on the northerly edge?
On the northerly edge, the setbacks would be 25 feet.
And it is now?
The building envelope is now located at 25 feet.
So even with the removal of the envelope, the 25 feet remain?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Brown, that is correct.
Okay.
They would be allowed to put accessory structures back there as allowed under the ordinance.
Where, within the setback?
Yes, such as a spa or a pool.
Okay, so grading could occur in that area?
Yes.
Okay, and now it can't occur?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, are there any additional commissioner questions for staff at this time? Okay, seeing none, perhaps at this moment it would be good to hear from the applicant. And can you give me a rough idea of about what kind of time you're going to need?
Just a few minutes. I'm Bob Easton, the architect representing Jack and Dottie Skidmore, who are the owners of the property. And when we realized that there was a height restriction on the property in the CC&Rs that was more difficult to accomplish than the regular height determining factors, part of the county requirements, and we had to lower the house on the site. It made us very aware that we would have drainage problems and have to build big retaining walls around the back of our building envelope. The size restriction for the houses in this particular lot split area is 5,000 feet, and we were complying with 5,000 square feet in terms of house size, and we also, because of this height restriction and also because of the desires of the client, need to do a one-story house. So we are using a substantial amount of area of the building envelope. And so that would require us to build a large retaining wall around the back of the house in order to meet the height requirement that is, let's say, more restrictive than what we would be having to meet if we did the county standard. So what we wanted to do was simply be able to modify the conditions to be able to grade in the setback area, to be able to landscape in the setback area, and to possibly in the future have a little terrace and a spa. That's our only intent to do anything in this building envelope. We're not asking to change the setbacks at all. In fact, we did not request of the county that we accomplish the request by removing the building envelope. They determined that that's the proper way for them to accomplish what we want to achieve. All we're asking for is to grade, to landscape, and to possibly build a little terrace and a spa in the setback area. So I know the neighbors, both to the north and to the east, are very concerned that we're getting something that they don't have, because we, if you grant our request today, will get rid of our building envelope, and they are still having to work within their building envelope. The owner to the east has already been building his house and has done substantial grading already in the setback area, because it is, I think, and I'm sure that both these folks feel, and Mr. and Mrs. Skidmore feel, that these requirements that you can't touch anything in this setback is highly unrealistic, and especially highly unrealistic in regard to the fact there's no endangered fauna and flora in this setback. And so I would certainly suggest that what you grant to the Skidmores, if in fact you grant the elimination of the building envelope, also be extended to the other folks that are in this lot split area, because, and I would certainly encourage you folks to have the planning department look at the inclusion of this particular condition in these particular lot splits or subdivisions when there is no evidence of endangered fauna and flora, because it just creates difficulty down the road. In other words, if that could be addressed before a subdivision or lot split is granted, it would save a lot of grief later on. There are some couple of oak trees the county was concerned about, and we have an arborist report showing that any proposed grading that we would do would not endanger those oak trees. So we have done the biologist report, and we have done the arborist report. I also want to point out that within the conditions of approval of this lot split, access to the house by means of driveway is allowed. And we do have a driveway that does go through the building envelope from the street up to within the building envelope, and then around the back, the northern edge of the property. And I can point that out.
I was going to ask if you wouldn't mind doing that. Is the pointer on his? Yeah.
The green line, of course, as you know, is the building envelope. This is the access road. Our house is in this area here, and the access driveway comes off here and comes around here into a motor court back here and enters the garage. The garage is back in this area here. So from this area on, we are excavating out and building a retaining wall to enclose that driveway. So what we're asking to do is be able to grade around this area and this area with a drainage swale, and not have to build a retaining wall along our building envelope line that would be 6 to 7 feet high in order for us to meet the CC&R height requirement, and then to be able to grade around, to take some of the soil we're digging out from back in here and be able to put it around the front of the house to mitigate the height of the house as seen from the access driveway. So I think that our idea and our plan is a good plan that the BAR at a conceptual level did approve in terms of the look of the house. The look of the house they approved was the first design that we did that was done to county height requirements. It turns out that Mrs. Morin, who is here and who owns this parcel here, noticed that what was happening and called to the attention, my attention and our attention, that there was this CCNR that the Skidmores had not understood the implications of and hadn't told me about, in terms of the height restriction, that they saw 16 feet, and that's what is in the county requirement, and so that's what we had originally designed the house to. So once I got back into it and discovered how I have to alter the house in order to meet the CCNR, because certainly it's our intent to meet the CCNR, that's when I discovered I had to lower the house and build this retaining wall and do all this, which I considered to be nonsense, in order to accommodate an unrealistic requirement in the conditions. And so that's a little bit of the history of the design of the house. I have not pursued the design of the house to meet the CCNR height requirement because I know I can do it. I know what the implications on the site are when I do it. I've gone that far. But I didn't want to spend the Skidmore's money and my time doing it until we knew that we could, or what we had to do in regard to the grading and the building envelope. So anyway, I think that really does it for my presentation, so I can answer any questions that anybody would have.
Commissioner Brown?
Yes. Mr. Easton, how large is the building envelope?
The building envelope, as you can see, the site is 1 acre, and the building envelope is, if this, I can't tell you an exact figure, but I'm trying to guess it right now. If the property line is here, you can see that the building envelope is probably about half the size of the lot, so it's probably around 20,000 square feet. The house has a number of ins and outs and a outside terrace here, and is set back a little bit for the garage here. So the house takes up 5,000 feet, and I've tried to set it as back on the property as I possibly can, so it has a nice appearance from the street where we can landscape and have it have a nice setting.
A question for you concerning the driveway, which you're taking from the southern driveway and looping around over into the area to the north. I read in the NMD that was done that there can be infrastructure improvements such as roads and so on and so forth outside of the construction envelopes. And I guess maybe that's a question to Ms. Bradbury, that in fact can occur, because that's apparently what he's doing. Is that accurate? I'm looking on page 10. Earth disturbance, no construction, including but not limited to infrastructure improvements. So a road can be built outside of that envelope. Is that correct?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Brown, can I just have a moment to look through and verify that?
Okay.
Can I build while they're looking up on the question? Because I'm feeling deliberately obtuse today. What do you want to do? What is the height that the
CCNR, see, the county requirements, according to Mrs. Black, is the height calculation. I called her about this because the conditions of approval of the lot split were done before the implementation of the new methodology of calculating the building height. And she pointed out to me that since that was done, then the old methodology should be used, because that is what apparently is appropriate. So that was our first design, before we realized that there was the CCNR condition that the height of the building be limited to 16 feet above the existing grade. Now, that's another matter that we need to take up with the MBAR, because the existing grade is defined in that CCNR as either the natural grade or an approved altered grade. And so I don't think that's your issue here today because it's in the CCNRs. But that's the complexity of this situation. I mean, we're planning to satisfy the CCNR because we want to get on with this. We don't want to do a fight. But what we're just simply asking here to do, what we originally asked to do, was be able to grade around in this area here to be able to get a flow of drainage around the back of the house without having to build a retaining wall around the back and basically keep this grade here or this existing part of the property be unusable. The landscape, you can't touch it. You're not even supposed to alter it. You're not supposed to walk on it. It's ridiculous.
Okay, I have some more questions. Okay. Mr. Easton, you were involved in trying to redo the county's oak tree ordinance.
Yes.
And I guess my question...
With our organization, CPR.
Right,
Not just
exactly.
myself personally.
No, I understand, but you were
Mr.
involved.
Chair, if I could just insert.
Okay.
It's not an ordinance. It was just interpretive guidelines. That was not an ordinance.
Okay, sorry. Well, fine. It is,
Yeah,
all right.
it's important.
Excuse me, and I'll retract that it was the interpretive guidelines in order to assist property owners in dealing with oaks. But the question that, since it is an interpretive ordinance, is in the conditions in the NMD, it talks about the drip line of the tree, which as you know, is different than the critical root zone.
Right.
The drip line is a much larger area than the critical root zone.
In some cases, in some cases not.
Yeah, it depends. I realize.
It depends, right.
Generally, I think if it's probably on a flat surface, it's generally larger. So your...
Not necessarily if it's a multi-trunk tree.
No, well, okay, these aren't multi-trunk, these are single-trunked. Your arborist talks about the critical root zone, yet the NMD talks about drip lines. So the drip line is a much larger area.
During the course of working with Mrs. Black and and the people that were involved in working with this, it was never said that you had to do the 5 foot from the drip line. It was whatever was appropriate, that an arborist that was consulted could use critical root zone or could use drip line plus 5 feet.
Okay. The conditions, or in the NMD, the conditions are the drip line. So this is what they use, and I'm just sort of interested that your arborist didn't sort of pick up what the conditions were. But anyway, that's all the questions I have for you. Okay. I have a lot of questions for staff, though.
Just real quick question. What's the differential between the CCR height and what the county provision would have been?
Well, the old county regulation in regard to height was you had a height determined whether you're in rural or urban zone. It was 16 feet if you're in the rural zone and 24 feet if you're in the urban zone. And that would be calculated from the average finish grade to the mean height of a pitched roof or the flat roof, the edge of the fascia of a flat roof. And so a much more liberal interpretation of height than what is in the CCNR, which is 16 feet from existing grade.
Okay. Okay, that's all the questions I have, unless you have more.
I have some questions of staff.
Commissioner Blau or Commissioner Valencia, do you have any questions at this time for this speaker?
No, thank you.
Okay.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
I've asked Holly to go find Ms. Almy, who processed this case.
Right,
So she's
okay.
gonna come down and
Okay.
assist in answering questions that are more historic in
Okay,
nature.
and I have just a sort of an overall question. It would appear, just from an earlier comment that you said, that the applicant is required to adhere to standards which are different today in terms of height, because that's changed. Is that correct?
Mr. Chair and Commissioner Brown, during or after the processing of this map, we changed the way that we calculate height in the Land Use and Development Code. And I think the discussion that Mr. Easton and I had, although I don't specifically remember it, was what's the effect of that change on a map that was a vested map? And I believe our conversation concluded with the fact that they are subject to the conditions that were in effect at the time their map was called complete. So they are actually subject to the old rules, not the new rules.
Okay, so that would apply to...
To development of the lots on this map.
Okay, fine, thank you, okay.
Okay, if we have no more questions of the applicant, then probably now would be a prudent time for public comment.
I wonder if we could hear from Ms. Almy, who processed this, to get some
I
information.
was only wondering whether that might be informed by the public comment, but
Well, Mr. Chair, maybe if I could recommend that you just ask
Okay,
questions that you had.
Okay,
and-
I would like to hear from Ms. Almy the issue of the envelopes, because there is an ESHA here, particularly on the lot, whatever lot that is, I guess it's 4, the one to the east. And while there may not be any native grasses on the particular site, there are other, and I realize this is slightly aside, but there are other sort of, there is the issue of the ESHAs, there is the issue of the drip lines of the oak trees, which are listed here, and apparently paving shall be pervious material will access roads or driveways encroach within 6 feet of a native specimen tree's drip line. So there are some other issues here that I think are part and parcel of what was done previously, so perhaps you can address those for me.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner, thank you very much. What exactly do you want to know? There is an ESHA on the site, and that...
Not on this lot, but for the lot
Not on the
split.
lot,
But
right.
Mr. Easton spoke more broadly about the applicant on, or the property owner on 4, grading outside the envelope, and that there were no ESHAs there. Well, I think that this is next to San Antonio Creek, and there are some ESHAs. Okay, so that's a whole different issue for another day. My question then revolves around these oak trees, where the tree protection and replacement program talks about that pervious materials where access roads or driveways, which encroach within 6 feet of a native specimen tree drip line, okay? And Mr. Easton has indicated that part of his reason for wanting the building envelope removed is so that he can go and grade and put roadways over there in that area. And I presume that that's within 6 feet of the tree's drip line.
That's not what we're asking.
Well, excuse me, it's my turn, and you'll have the opportunity to come back, but, well, unfortunately, we don't have any maps or diagram to understand where, in fact, development will occur on the site. And if, Ms. Bradbury, you have that, that might be helpful to see that so that we are not confused. Do you have that?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Brown, I have an excerpt from the applicant submitted arborist report that will show that.
That's not my question. My question revolves around the condition that was in the NMD that talks about there shall be no, the paving shall be pervious material where access roads or driveways encroach within 6 feet. Mr. Easton has explained that he's not building a driveway in that area. So I'm wondering, do we have any indication of what the proposed development is going to look like or be located outside of this building envelope? Because this, to me, is the issue, and we haven't heard from the applicants, but I would need to have that information.
hang on just a sec, because I'm going to go through some kind of process limitations here, and I'll come back. I want to give staff a chance to respond to the question, and if staff would like to have the applicant contribute, then I'll ask at that point.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner, thank you. It's a little difficult to jump into a hearing in midstream when I haven't been watching, so I'm a little confused about what you want to know about. The tree protection program and replacement program is a very strict replacement program, such as the kind that we implemented in the year 2000.
I understand that, and I appreciate that. I guess the question is also, it says that roads are allowed if you look at on page 10 of the NMD, condition number 1, it says that you can build infrastructure improvements such as roads outside of the construction envelopes. So, but the tree protection replacement program indicates that you have to have pervious material within 6 feet of the tree's drip line. So Mr. Easton has explained he wants to put a roadway outside of the envelope, and I don't know where it is, I haven't seen a diagram of it. How does that square with the tree protection program?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner, as an immediate response, I would say that the area of the roadway within the tree drip line would need to be pervious material.
And so then grading is in fact allowed within that drip line.
Commissioner Brown, could I make just a thought here to kind of drill down on the issues you've got? What if we took a 5-minute break and you sat with Ms. Almy and assisted, perhaps with the assistance of the applicant, to drill your question down, and then we could go back on the record? Would that be a...
That's fine with me. I don't know if any other commissioners have this issue about where the development is going to occur outside of the envelope. Because it seems to me that's part of the issue here, because that's why he wants to get rid of the envelope so he can use the entire site.
And what I see is that there may be some contradiction between our relative understandings, and I think you're going down a track I'm interested in.
Okay, that's fine.
So let's take 5-10 minutes, have staff, Commissioner Brown, and the applicant identify the issues that we want to discuss, and that way we can move forward. So let's take 5 and 10, and let's get these dealt with.
May I observe that conversation, because I'm fairly well-versed on what's there and how it occurred and all.
I'm going to be looking at the table here, and you can...
We'll do it on
And Mr. Chair, just for the viewing audience, this conversation will take place just between less than a quorum of the Planning Commission and the applicant.
Thank you. The record. And I'm in slightly new territory, Ms. Black. I know that we initiated this process at the request of some clarification of questions and issues for Commissioner Brown. I know we have to consider public comment and to consider a reasonable flow to arrive at where we go. I'm going to welcome your input at this time.
Mr. Chair, thank you. I think what is clear at this point in time is that the conditions of approval, particularly the tree protection condition, has some conflicting language within it. And so my recommendation would be that we hear from the members of the public that are here today so that we know what their concerns are, and that we continue this to a future hearing so that we can both work with the applicant and the neighbors and resolve the inconsistency within the tree protection condition and come back rather than try and address it on the fly in the Planning Commission hearing.
Okay.
But I think the first step is to hear from the public, and then we can decide if that in fact makes sense.
Okay. If that's a reasonable formula and process, I think we'll undertake that. So I have only 2 speaker slips. If I am going to have a third speaker, then make out a slip for me and hand it here. And we'll take public comment now. I'll start with Don Elkonen, followed by Diana Morin, and then whoever my third speaker will be.
Hi, I'm Don Elkonen. I'm the owner of the property directly to the east, lot number 4. Thank you for allowing me a time to address this issue today. First, let me say that I first met Mr. Skidmore when he was purchasing his property, and we had a very wonderful conversation, exchanged phone numbers. and I've never heard from them again. I had hoped, and we had made overtures to Bob Easton, to be involved in this process. And how this impacts is that staff, in all their findings on this, have solely focused on the issues as they relate to this lot, number 3, and their request. However, they're referring to a tentative parcel map that was constructed for all 4 lots, and to which all 4 lots are restricted by. All 4 owners were given title policies, and within those title policies, reference was made to an exception regarding the CCRs and the tentative map. I find it ludicrous that Bob Easton would say that the first he'd heard about this was when he came to county, because I know every architect I've ever worked on with a project, the first thing they ask for when they start with a project is a title policy and all the related documents. Be that as it may, the height issues is not really the relevant issue here, but the other part, number 8, that they're trying to ask be removed, nothing happening outside of the building envelope, does pertain. And as follows, as I said in my first letter, which should be part of your packet, the issues of grading and landscaping, I think, are very restrictive and not necessary. As it's said in the negative declaration, that the only grasses found were in the 20-degree area of the big boulders on the western side of Diana's property number 2? Number 1. However, we were restricted by them. I would be very much in support of a review of whatever you do on this parcel to be effective for all the parcels. We came in and purchased our property based upon, in part, the luxury of a little bit more space, where we knew that accessory buildings and other uses within a setback would not be available and would give us the benefit of being able to know that we wouldn't have a 12-foot accessory building staring over us somewhere. Now, before you is a request with certain explanations of what they intend to do. But as I've tried to point out, that they might end up getting what they want from you, selling the property, and someone else will come in and do something totally different, pushing the building into to where the envelope is now. I do not begrudge the Skidmore's right to ask for what they're seeking, and I don't feel that it in itself is restrictive, but you have to realize that it's not locked in concrete, and then it gives them powers we don't have. They can landscape right up to their lot line, and I can't. So I think number 2 actually, and that is that you should review staff's findings and have them be seen more in terms of the overall. Specifically, 2.1 does not address that the purchasers knew going in that they had the restrictions they had and the lifestyle in mind at the time. They're saying their lifestyle is what's causing this, but they haven't changed their lifestyle. You know, the 2.2 does impose additional burden upon the other lot owners instead of what it says that it does not put burden on Skidmore. It does impose additional burden to the other lot owners unless all maintain their equality with regard to these building envelopes. More specifically, it has to do with landscaping and draining and grading that allows proper drainage. So number 2.3 does, instead of what staff finds, it does indeed alter the rights and interests of the other lot owners again, unless all are held to an equal standard. Additionally, I mean, it is, given that now one lot holder's in front of you on something that 2 years ago you decided was fine the way it was. 2 years. And now they're asking for a change solely for themselves. And then finally, I think, using the trees as the example, I think we're not seeing the forest for the trees. If your only concern with regard to applicants' application is the trees, well, more power to you for the trees, but you're missing, I believe, the forest. So I would ask you to review both this letter and the one I previously gave you. I am very concerned about the possibility of accessory buildings, pools, cabanas, 12-foot building heights. Okay? Thank you very much.
Okay, Ms. Moran, followed by Mr. Skidmore.
Good morning or afternoon, as the case may be. I've lost track of time. Thank you very much for hearing me, members of the Planning Commission.
Can you pull the microphone close, because we have some folks on remote.
That's a first for me. Usually they can hear me 3 acres over without a microphone, so I will do that. Thank you. I'm going to tell you that I'm here really for one reason. I'm here because I am extremely disappointed and feeling let down by the fact that you might possibly allow this modification to remove the building envelope on the Skidmore's property, as Mr. Easton has requested. The reason I'm disappointed is because 2 years ago, my husband and I, when we looked at the property, and I should tell you that we're long-term residents of San Antonio Creek Road. We've lived there 26 years. We purchased the lot with the little home on it, lot number 2. My son lives there. We also purchased lot number 1, which is the far lot, the one that was most affected by the bunch grass. And the reason we bought it is because our son, living in the small home, we might potentially downsize and build our own home on that other empty lot that's, again, affected by the bunch grass, which is what they refer to in the documents. My husband and I took this and we read it. And we read it over and over and over. We highlighted it. We discussed it. We took the map that we were given, along with all of the other property owners. Each one of us was given a bucket with a handle on it, full of these documents, very nicely laid out. It was so clear. And what we bought was what's on this map and on that map, which is 25 feet between the building envelope to the communal property line and 10 feet onto our property. That's 35 feet. That was our security because it was the word of the county. These are the county's words. We turn to this page, if you turn to number 9. Construction envelopes shall be designated on all proposed parcels and located to avoid oak trees, except those to be removed for construction, which my 2 trees are not. Specifically, the word specifically, construction envelope shall be drawn 6 feet outside of the drip line of all oak trees. I don't really care how many biologists go out and look at the tree. There is no way that anyone can see anything other than the fact that those drip lines on those 2 mature, beautiful live oak trees hang over 11 feet into the Skidmore's property. I don't want my trees to be killed. I don't want them to be damaged. I've already told my son that's where I'm going to install the swing for my grandchildren to swing on. Those are my trees. And when I read this, I felt confident that the county was going to stand by what they said was going to happen. And that's why I feel so let down. Now, there's so many things that were red flags to me that I don't understand why Mr. Easton, or in fact Mr. Skidmore, didn't see. Now, without getting into a big, long story, basically the CC&Rs that they refer to are CC&Rs that my husband put into place on that property. We were the first first person to buy the lot. We are the ones that put in the CC&Rs. There were none before. The first thing that happened was Mr. Easton started to build a 24 or 5-foot house, totally oblivious of these CC&Rs. Well, again, who doesn't look at CC&Rs when you buy a new subdivision? Now, I asked Mr. Easton to work with us. I have emails back in March to tell me, what is it you want to do out there? How's it going to affect me? Being willing to work with him, and then, of course, unbeknownst to me, he was here to have the modification changed. In the CEQA findings, okay, it specifically says, there are changes in circumstances that make any or all of the conditions of such recorded final or parcel map no longer appropriate or necessary. This is Mr. Easton's proposal to you. The applicant has lifestyle interests necessitating outdoor use in his rear yard, and there are no physical constraints to the removal of the construction envelope. Well, I'd like to use that portion of my yard too, but I can't, and I knew that when I bought it. I knew that I couldn't put a spa or a part of the house or anything else over in that area. I knew it. They knew what they were buying. Mr. O'Conan knew what they were buying. I knew what I was buying, but they want to change it. It's highly unfair to other owners. This is a very small subdivision. These are 4 lots. My kids used to sell green beans on this property. It's very rural. You all like to call it semi-rural, I think is your terminology, but it's very rural. And by allowing the building envelopes to be done away with, I realize the house can't get any closer to those property lines, but believe me, you can go up and down San Antonio Creek Road and look at what has happened since the Painted Cave fire, and you will see that it looks a lot denser because everybody's built bigger homes, closer to the lot lines, out in the building envelopes. You know things happen after it's done, and that's what I'm afraid may happen. So I'm asking you today to please look at the bigger issue. I am willing to work with the neighbor if we can come to some kind of agreement, but please look at it from a perspective of all 4 parcels and all 3 owners. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Skidmore appears to be our last speaker on this issue.
Well, it's still good morning, as it is right now. I think I want to make sure we all understand a couple things. First of all, the last thing we want to do is kill a couple of oak trees. I was never anticipated, nor would I want to. We're all in favor of things like that. And I think there's another misunderstanding. The building envelope, we really never asked, or I never really wanted to change it. I'm perfectly fine with the way it's set up, the 25 feet from the back, the 10 feet on the side. Mr. Easton's designed the house for that particular purpose. All we want to do is put some landscaping in. And I think my neighbors would want to put landscaping in that as well. And the only reason we decided that we had to go this route is because we have to put the landscaping in and we have to do some grading. Otherwise, we're building retaining walls right next to the foundation. So I'm sure no one in the county really wanted to say, you can build a nice house, but you can't do any landscaping around it. But you can put a driveway on the side. It just didn't make a lot of sense. And so we asked, well, what's the appropriate way to do this? Well, the appropriate way is to make an application, and so Bob went ahead and made the application. Then I think he was advised, well, what you have to do is, under the application, you have to get rid of the building envelope, or the construction envelope. I'm not sure what the terminology is here. But the county rules would still apply. The setback is still there, not going to change, from the 25 feet, the 10 feet, and so forth and so on. So the design hasn't changed. The setback, the location of the property hasn't changed. All we want to do is put some landscaping in and some hardscape in and put the drainage in. And the last thing we want to do is hurt the trees. Now, apparently, Bob was supposed to contact Diana, and that didn't happen. I'm sorry that didn't happen, but we'll be glad to go out there, walk with whoever wants to, and show you what we want to do. I don't think it's anything dramatic. It's something I think we all want to do. Put some landscaping and hardscaping around the house. That's it.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, Mr. Easton.
I'll be very brief. I just want to add something, and that is when we knew we wanted to accomplish something, I did called the county to find out what our procedure was. And I called Peter Imhoff, who is a senior planner, I believe, and he said that he understood that if we were to try to change something in regard to the conditions, we would have to go back and all the lots would have to be changed. That since it was a set of conditions that were for a lot split of 4 lots, it would have to be all 4 lots that would be changed. I then talked to Ms. Almy, and she said that no, we could do it with an individual lot. And so that's what our approach was. And so I wanted to clarify that we were trying to follow what we were advised by the county to take an approach. Also, we did not go into this saying that we wanted to change the building envelope. We just simply wanted to be able to grade for drainage and to do landscaping and possibly build a little terrace and a spa off the master bedroom within that area. That's all we wanted to do. We have no other plans to build cabañas or swimming pools or da-di-da in the setback area. And so this is something that I think Mr. Ellenen talked about, and that is it should be applied to all these lots because it's ridiculous not to be able to landscape around your property, So that's...
All right. Thank you very much. All right, I'm going to bring it back to the commission. And Ms. Black, I think you have some protocol or structural suggestions that, if not, I think Commissioner Brown does, so have at it.
Mr. Chair, if the commission wanted to review the condition that we're actually deleting, because it's a condition that's being deleted, it's not included in your recorded map modification conditions, but it is in your ND. It is in your ND on page 10. And if you look at page 10 of the attached negative declaration, it indicates that what was going to be designated are construction envelopes. And it indicates that no construction, including but not limited to infrastructure improvements such as roads and sanitary waste lines, earth disturbance or construction equipment shall occur or operate outside of those envelopes. So the reason we advised the applicant that they needed to modify the envelope is because it's a very specific envelope for construction. They couldn't do grading, they couldn't do the spa outside of it. So I just wanted to make it clear that we weren't suggesting that we were just telling them the path that they would need to take because the envelope is a very, very specific envelope.
Okay.
That being said, it is not our practice to, when somebody comes in with one lot in a 4-lot or a 40-lot subdivision to say, oh, well, if we're going to modify this construction envelope, then we're going to modify them all. Because we analyze the specific request given the specific facts before us. And I can't stand here today and say we should modify all of the envelopes because I think there are other resources on the parcels within this area that do need protection. And so that's just not our practice to do that.
Okay. Commissioner Brown, this is in your district, and I think you have some suggestions or perhaps further questions.
I just need to Ms. Meester, and please correct me or guide me if I'm sort of wrong. There's several issues here. Is that the conditions that were prescribed based on the NMD are contradictory in themselves concerning the drip line and construction or no construction. So no matter what you do with the envelope, if you leave the envelope, we're inconsistent as conditioned.
Mr. Chair and Commissioner Brown, I actually think if you leave the envelope as it is, those contradictory statements in the tree protection plan will not become operative because the construction envelope as designated shows all site development, all site disturbance outside of the drip line of the trees. So the fencing could occur and there wouldn't be any disturbance within those drip lines. What happens if you remove that construction envelope is then construction can occur closer to the trees than that envelope would have allowed. And then there's some conflicting language in the tree protection plan that or condition that indicates that if you're going to grade under the, within the drip line of trees and install a driveway, it should be pervious, and then there's another portion that says you have to fence 6 feet outside of the drip line. But if you don't do anything, I don't think those conflicts will become operable.
But, and I'm sorry to belabor this, but as I read this, you may have, well, notwithstanding the conflicts within the tree, if you leave the envelope, they can still do the roads. No.
No.
But that's the conflict.
It says including the construction envelope condition, that's why I pointed you
Right.
to that. It says
But not.
no construction, including but not limited
limited.
to infrastructure improvements such
Okay.
as roadway and
All right.
sanitary. That cannot occur outside
Okay.
of those construction envelopes.
Okay.
So you wouldn't have that conflict.
Okay.
You wouldn't see
All right, so.
this driveway in the area
Okay.
that's being proposed.
So then the question before the commission is simply, has nothing to do with the sort of, if the envelope were removed and the inconsistencies with the tree protection, it's whether or not the commission wishes to remove the envelope or to keep it in place.
And Mr. Chair, I think that's what I would advise the commission to
Okay.
decide. And if you decide
Fine.
that you're willing to entertain some change in the envelope or removal of the envelope, then I would recommend that you continue it. If you're
Okay,
going
all
to
Okay.
recommend that the envelope not be changed at all based upon the public testimony, then it would be helpful to have that direction so we can draft findings that would be appropriate.
Mr. Chairman, when it's my turn.
It is now your turn.
Great. It seems to me, from my view of the public testimony, that the neighbors don't really object to grading or landscaping. The only thing they object to is, for example, some kind of a structure that would have a roof on it. I'm wondering if we can modify
No.
the restrictive uses outside of the building envelope that would allow things like landscaping and grading and things, spas, patios that don't have any height to them. And because the only reason that those were permitted before was for the issue of the fauna. Can we not modify that condition, leave the building envelope in place? I mean, because the reality is the building envelope is the same building envelope you would have based on the standard setbacks. The real issue here is what you can do outside the setbacks. And I can understand the neighbor's concern saying that when I bought the property, you know, I had this assurance that there would be no cabana or some structure that I could see from perhaps my yard. But the issue of, there doesn't seem to be objection to landscaping or hardscapes that have no height to them.
Commissioner Brown.
Commissioner Blau, I don't think that's the neighbor's concern. That may be one of their concerns, but I think they have other concerns. I think it's not so much about height. I think it's about the building envelope per se, and nothing outside of that, because it will affect.
Well, the building envelope, I mean, for the physical building doesn't change with or without the building envelope that's there, because you can't build anything within those setbacks, at least not part of the house's structure. I'm going to suggest that we do continue this to some period in the future, with the idea that having staff taking a look at, maybe it was bad advice to remove the building envelope, maybe there are other ways to work out the issues that the neighbors would not object to. I'd like to see them have that opportunity.
Commissioner Brown.
I would like to hear from my other commissioners on how they feel about that particular issue, because it seems to me that I think we need to resolve the issue first. Are we going to do something with the building envelope, or we're not? And that will determine whether or not we go forward with Commissioner Blau's suggestion. So it'd be helpful for me to hear from other commissioners.
Okay. Do other commissioners want to?
Mr. Chair?
Yes?
I'm looking at the map here, and there's only one area, the building envelope touches the house touches the building envelope just in, all the way around the building envelope, but it only crosses one area, and that would be in the, see, he doesn't have a north-south. It would be on the east side. There's one protrusion of the terrace. And that's the major problem. Is that correct?
No.
They may want to do more, Joe. Does he want one more protrusion than that? Does he want to go out beyond that one spot?
Mr. Chair and Commissioner Valencia, I think the issue is not just the intrusion outside of the envelope in that one area, but it's the access being put at the rear of the lot outside of that envelope.
Okay, then I go along with my fellow commissioners to continue this item and have him send in a better map that shows everything in detail. The sketch is very sketchy. It's a poor map showing all the development and trees and so on. There's only one tree shown on here. There's more than that. So I think it just needs to be redone completely.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Commissioner Brown, are you?
Well, I just wonder if we could hear from Commissioner Cooney, because I think for me, the issue still remains, we're going to hold to the development envelope, or are we going to remove it? And then if we're going to do some change, then we can continue. But until I sort of get to that first hurdle, I don't know where to go. So perhaps we could hear from you and Commissioner Cooney.
Okay. If you're not ready, I will, or, okay. It seems to me that if there is ever an opportunity to promote discussion between neighbors and a resolution, this would be an example, because I do see some elements of lack of clarity that make it difficult for me to arrive at that fundamental conclusion of do we or don't we right now. And it seems to me that the parties should have an opportunity to reconcile so that someone isn't afraid of something that isn't the case, that is intended as something different when there's an interpretation. If the parties get together, change the interpretation, work with staff, everybody understands it, I'll entertain myself a decision either way. But it seems we're in slightly vague or ambiguous territory here. So my sense would probably be a continuance might serve harmony. Commissioner Cooney.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Commissioner Brown, I'm a big proponent of development envelopes, construction envelopes. I think these problems can be anticipated at the time a subdivision occurs. That's a discretionary permit, and the opportunity exists to limit construction throughout the development, not necessarily with regard to height, but certainly including height. But the amount, the intensity of development, we had that on our last project. We heard that on 2 separate occasions. Intensity of development is a big factor, and it is most important when you have natural resources in the immediate surrounding area, but it's not the only issue. It is the intensity of development. I think Ms. Moran indicated that in the neighborhood generally, she's aware that there is more density than there used to be. So I think it's perfectly within the discretion of the Planning Commission to limit the amount of development by use of a construction or development envelope as was done here. Now, having said that, sometimes, I suppose, the envelopes are not perfect and they make a house absolutely unreasonably constrained when in fact there is a limited ability to even put in a driveway. I don't want to foreclose the possibility that the neighbors here could reach some accommodation to the applicant that would make it more palatable without sacrificing the notion of a construction envelope in general, not only for this parcel, but for all the parcels in the subdivision. So I wouldn't oppose a continuance, but if I had to vote today, I'd retain the existing envelope.
Mr. Chairman, I have another comment, if you don't mind.
Commissioner Blau.
Yeah, I think removal of the building envelope is probably impractical because and I think the problem that you're going to have, and the reason that they have to come, that the staff has to come back to us is, although it would solve the problem of allowing them to grade and landscape, there are the unintended consequences of some future owner building some structure in there. So what we have here is we've got the applicant saying, look, I'm not going to build these structures there, I just want to landscape and grade it. And you've got the neighbor that's saying, yeah, that's true, and they may not object to that, but that would also give somebody else, a subsequent property owner, the right to build something there. So the removing the building, in my opinion, is not going to solve the problem. And it would have solved the problem for the applicant, but not the neighbors. But by continuing this, it gives the applicant, and more importantly, the staff, the ability to come back with another method that would allow the landscaping and the grading to occur.
Okay, Commissioner Brown, does
Okay.
that give you reasonable?
Yeah, it certainly does, and because while have the interest of sort of clarifying some of these issues with the trees, and I do support the notion that I think that that this building envelope is necessary. There may be some other way of accomplishing what everybody would like to accomplish, and I would like the staff to be able to explore that. So, and I think that the findings also need to be changed. I don't think they're really, they're not really appropriate. So what I would like to do is make a motion to continue this until the hearing of,
Mr. Chair and Commissioner Brown, I had originally said maybe September 10th in Santa Maria, but I think that's too short.
Okay.
Okay.
So we'd have.
I think this should be in Santa Barbara. This is clearly a Santa Barbara item
Well,
involving all parties.
And that creates some difficulty because we have a meeting scheduled September 24th in Santa Barbara, but Commissioner Brown is not here.
Right.
We just learned that the hearing room in Santa Maria is not available on October 1st, so I think we will keep September 30th as the date to hear Trinkeon Ridge in Santa Maria. My goal would be to shift the item that's scheduled for October 1st to, not Trinkeon Ridge, I'm sorry, Lompoc Wind.
Okay. Sorry about that.
Sorry, too many projects floating around in my head. Shift the one item that was on October 1st to September 30th. And have that heard remotely. So we're not going to have, I guess my point is, we're not going to have another South County meeting
Until November.
Until November.
Right.
Well, I
Unless-
suggest we
unless
hear it
have
on October
first.
1st and
September 30th, you mean?
October 1st, that
So
we
you wanna
have it
keep
here
that
in
meeting?
Santa
Yes.
Barbara. Yes.
Right.
You know, we have one other item now. There may
That's
be
fine.
something else that
Right.
we have to deal with, and we have back-to-back meetings on occasion, so, and unless that's undoable for one of our North County brethren.
Mr. Chair, it's, I don't want to speak for the North County Planning Commissioners, but I do want them to know that they won't be able to, I don't think, attend remotely because the AP, oh, they might be able to? Never mind.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Then, Mr. Easton, the first.
Could I just have a clarifying statement here, which may help you folks in
Okay.
considering this item, and that is the conditions of approval mentioned originally that there would be a 16-foot height limit to the house. There was an addendum after the Morans got involved with that issue, and they were concerned about their view, and so they amended the conditions to say that the height was 16 feet from existing grade. Now, the Skidmores saw 16 feet in the original document and saw 16 feet in the amended document. They didn't realize that it was a different set of requirements, because the 16 feet in the original document didn't specify from existing grade. The implication was there that it was per the county standard. And that's when I called Mrs. Black to find out if we were using the new parameters or using the old parameters. And so that's why I went ahead and designed the house originally, because I didn't have that that amended document which specified 16 feet from existing grade. That was the Moran's addition to the conditions. So I was ignorant of that when I designed that original house. I had the house higher, I had it set so it would meet county height requirements, did not require grading for the driveway around the back of the house because the house was set higher. But since we have to comply with the CCNRs, and we're not questioning applying, working with those, I have to lower the house, and that's why we need a retaining wall. And that's why we need to, because we have to have a one-story house because of that condition. It can only be 16 feet high. There's no way to do a two-story house. So that's why we're using more of the property. So I'm just saying that the whole reason this has come about was because of the condition to have the house 16 feet above the existing grade. And therefore, we have a grading and a drainage issue around the back of the house we're trying to resolve with grading. So if there's any way we can work out Mr. Fow's suggestion that we can keep the building envelope and simply modify the setback, the conditions to say, yes, everybody that wants to, or at least Mr. Skidmore at least, can grade for drainage and can landscape and perhaps build a structure lower than 6 feet in that setback, we'd be very happy. Thank you very much.
Well,
Yeah.
Mr. Eason, just, I need to get a date from you. Is October 1st? I appreciate that that's some
Jack
distance.
is, yes,
Okay.
that would be fine.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Then-
Thank you.
Then I'll just make, Ms. Black.
Mr. Chair and Commissioners, with respect to the height, I think I was clear. So the rules that were in effect, the old methodology is the methodology that we use for height, and there's nothing I can do to relieve them of their CCNRs. That's really between the applicant and the other homeowners in the area. So we're not proposing to come back with anything on height, just so you know.
Okay.
Exactly.
All right.
I didn't hear a second. If not, I'll second that motion to continue it.
Okay.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to continue. Is there any further discussion? I see Commissioner Brown's light is lit.
I'm ready to vote.
Okay, Ms. Oppelman, I think we're ready to go there.
Commissioner Brown?
Aye.
Commissioner Blau?
Aye.
Commissioner Cooney?
Aye.
Commissioner Valencia? Commissioner Jackson?
Aye.
Vote carries 5-0.
Okay. Thank you very much. All right, we have another item, but it is also 12:15. Is it my colleague's interest to do lunch? Predicated on what Mrs. Black was about to say?
Mr. Chair, I was just going to suggest that there's virtually no audience here, so the commission may want to decide whether or not they think it's really going to take a full hour. It's up to you.
Okay, I will hear my commissioners weigh in on that.
I agree. I've got a meeting at 1 o'clock I'd love to go to, so if we could get done between now and 1 o'clock, it'd really be helpful.
Okay, let's give it a try. Shift on the fly, Mr. Masson, or Mr. Ward? Mr. Mattson. Do you need some setup time?
Can't you rotate this?
1 minute. We'll take a minute break. I'm not going anywhere.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The following is a hearing on the request of Planning and Development that the Planning Commission recommend that the Board of Supervisors adopt an addendum to the 2003-2008 Housing Element Negative Declaration 04 NGD 4 and adopt a resolution recommending that the Board of Supervisors adopt an amendment to the 2003-2008 Santa Barbara County General Plan Housing Element to reflect the residential development capacity made available through the Board's approval of the Isla Vista Master Plan on August 21st, 2007.
Thank you very much. Good morning, Mr. Mattson.
Good morning, Chair Jackson, members of the Commission. Thank you for allowing us to present to you today a draft amendment to the housing element. To provide a little bit of context as to where we are today, I'll start off just by mentioning that last time I presented to the Commission in April of this year, I discussed the 2008 Regional Housing Needs Allocation process, or the new RHNA, as well as the numbers that the county would be receiving for the 2009-2014 housing element cycle. Those numbers I discussed were adopted by the SBCAG board and are now reflected in a final RHNA plan that was submitted to the state last week by the SBCAG board. In total, the county received 1,017 units, or roughly 11% of the total for the region. This new RHNA assignment essentially sets forward a course of housing targets that will then be reflected in the goals and policies of the 2009-2014 housing element. But before we can tackle this task of developing the next update to our general plan housing element, some unfinished business remains. That old business relates to the RHNA cycle and the 2003-2008 housing element. Now, this technical amendment that I'm presenting to you today takes a major step toward wrapping up the unfinished business of the former RHNA cycle, a cycle whereby the county received a RHNA of 6,064 units. Back in 2006, the good news was that we were able, through our general plan and our community plans, to accommodate all but 1,235 lower-income units. At that time, a new plan for the community of Isla Vista marked opportunity on the horizon, an opportunity to address and reduce that shortfall. Today, we're here to talk about the results of the Isla Vista Master Plan and the process that's now necessary for the county to take credit for the many good things that are happening in Isla Vista. First, I'll begin by discussing the purpose of this technical amendment. Then I'll follow by providing a summary of the amendment, including some background as to how we got here today. And then I'll finish by discussing the remaining steps that the county must take to place a capstone on the 2003-2008 housing element process. Now, state law recognizes the fact that community plans, redevelopment plans, and other general plan amendments can and do change over time. When these plans change, so does the context under which a jurisdiction is required to demonstrate to the state its ability to fulfill the housing mandate. This is particularly the case in this county where the community planning tradition is well established. Accordingly, state law allows agencies to account for land use changes that occur during a planning period and credit any changes in housing capacity toward the agency's RHNA. The process for doing this is simple. A technical amendment to the housing element is needed, whereby the analysis and land inventory included in the housing element is revised to capture the new development capacity resulting from the legislated land use changes. It's under this context the amendment being proposed to the housing element is necessary and has been directed by state HCD so that the new housing opportunities resulting from the Board of Supervisors' adoption of the Isla Vista Master Plan in August of 2007 can formally be recognized in the 2003-2008 housing element. Now, without question, this is an important decision. It's an important action. As you know, the county currently has a RHNA shortfall of 1,235 lower-income units. This shortfall must be addressed by a state-mandated rezone program under the tenets of state law. If the county fails to fully address the shortfall, then we would no longer be in substantial compliance with state law. With this amendment being proposed today, the scope of that rezone program will be reduced from 1,235 current units of shortfall to 370 units. Now, as the Commission is aware, it's been a long but at the same time productive road to get to this juncture. Both the state-mandated housing element and the community-driven Ivy Master Plan were initiated in the early part of this decade. Yet it is still quite important to remind ourselves that both plans have been on a parallel path for the last 5 years. The new housing opportunities resulting from the board's adoption of the Isla Vista Master Plan were anticipated all along. But up to this point, none of those housing opportunities were actually counted in the housing element land inventory. To do so would have been speculative, since until the board's action last August, no new capacity for housing in Isla Vista was real. Furthermore, premature quantification would have discounted the thousands of hours dedicated by residents, community leaders, and downtown business owners to revitalize the community through new housing and commercial development opportunities, as well as the changes to the regulatory framework that remove the old barriers to redevelopment. Now, given the history of this housing element, it's also important to note that nothing we're discussing here today is new. Twice before, the Planning Commission has heard presentations where the Isla Vista Master Plan was identified as a viable strategy for addressing the county's RHNA shortfall. On November 30th of 2005, that presentation came from Board of Supervisors Housing Ad Hoc Committee, which consisted of 3rd and 2nd District Supervisors Firestone and Rose, and by Planning Commission members Montgomery and McGinnis, noting that if the Isla Vista Master Plan progressed as planned, the RHNA shortfall would be reduced. On May 24th of 2006, the reiteration of this message came from county staff just after the board's adoption of the housing element on May 9th, 2006. At that time, the Isla Vista Master Plan was still not complete, and county staff recounted how the RHNA shortfall could not be accommodated with existing zoning and development strategies. The caveat then, as it was in 2005, was that the IV Master Plan would contribute to solving the RHNA shortfall. Shortly thereafter, on August 2nd of 2006, State HCD conditionally certified the county's housing element, noting that compliance rested on the county's commitment to rezoning enough land to accommodate the shortfall. The state themselves pointed to the Housing Element Policy 1.10, which notes the role of an adopted Isla Vista Master Plan in helping to reduce the RHNA shortfall. Then, on August 21st of 2007, a little more than a year after State HCD's conditional certification, the board adopted the IV Master Plan. Following adoption, the county requested final certification from State HCD, asserting that the Isla Vista Master Plan provided a new build-out of 1,417 units, well above the RHNA shortfall of 1,235 units. Staff noted that all the land had been zoned above 20 units an acre, which is the established density target identified by state law as being affordable by design to lower-income households. Then on September 5th of last year, our office briefed your commission on the county's efforts to maintain compliance by showing the state the potential for new housing in Isla Vista. Shortly thereafter, in November, State HCD acknowledged this request for final certification by indicating that the board's action to adopt the Isla Vista Master Plan did produce additional residential capacity in the South Coast community of Isla Vista, a community that's adjacent to the county's largest employer, UCSB, and a community that's a source of significant professional talent that's vital to the future success of the region. Now, to get to the root of the issue, State HCD requested that the county further analyze and refine how much of these 1,417 units of new housing capacity would be reasonable and feasible to develop. This refined analysis would form the basis from which the county could credit capacity toward the existing RHNA shortfall. Now, it really boils down to a simple question. How many of these units would emerge with a relative planning certainty out of the newly adopted Isla Vista Master Plan? That direction from State HCD initiated a productive 6-month dialogue with the county. Through the process, county staff received valuable guidance from State HCD on developing a specific analytical model that quantified the realistic capacity for new housing in Isla Vista while also meeting the basic tenets of state law. Our dialogue culminated in a highly refined analysis of the Isla Vista Master Plan housing sites on March 27th of 2008, which is submitted to State Housing Community Development and centered on documented market trends in Isla Vista. It's centered on land use economics. It's centered on project-level pro formas. And it's centered on the host of board-adopted redevelopment incentives. That analysis concluded that a reasonable development potential for 865 additional housing units in Isla Vista has been established by the land use changes that accompanied the adoption of the Isla Vista Master Plan. Responding in a June 16, 2008 letter, just a couple of months ago, State HCD acknowledged our analysis and directed the county to amend its housing element to reflect the capacity for new housing in Isla Vista, and concurrently directed the county to implement a revised rezone program to address the remaining shortfall. So a key aspect of the amendment before you today for your consideration and recommendation is the formal quantification in the housing element of what could realistically be built in Isla Vista. Now, mechanically, this 865 unit capacity would be deducted from the county's remaining RHNA shortfall of 1,235 units, leaving a 370 unit deficit that then must be accommodated through a state-mandated focused rezone program before the end of this calendar year. So how did we arrive at this total for Isla Vista? The full details are contained in your staff report. I won't go through the details, but in light of the time, I just want to be brief and cover the basics of our capacity analysis that we provided to the state. First, it's important to point out that state HCD themselves recommended the analytical model used by the county to identify the new units that could be built in Isla Vista. This model is based on what we are already seeing happen on the ground in Isla Vista during the first year of the Isla Vista Master Plan adoption and the first year that that new capacity was made available. These projects are real. These projects are tangible. These are projects that landowners are willing to invest in. This includes, for example, the Paradise IV project that you approved in February of 2008, as well as 4 other project examples that are currently in the development review pipeline. So how were these sites selected? The analytical model that we developed selected sites with similar land use, economics, and parcel characteristics of these existing projects just mentioned. Some of those characteristics included lot location, the valuation of existing commercial uses, the underlying land values, as well as the potential for higher intensity or higher density development using the redevelopment agency program incentives as well as state density bonus law. We also looked at making sure that economies of scale could be achieved by only counting sites capable of yielding a minimum of 16 new units, which also mirrored a tenet of state law. In total, the model identified 23 sites. That's 13 out of 55 downtown parcels and 10 out of several hundred parcels in the mixed residential design zone district. These 23 sites were called out because the potential for new units was high and development could be predicted with relative certainty. It was a fairly even split between the two. But it's also worth noting that all the sites designated were well above the 20-unit per acre affordability target set by state law. Again, in our analytical model, which was based on state HCD's input, this yielded a realistic capacity of 865 units. Now, any analysis is a point-in-time analysis. That's an important point to remember, to point out. Other models could have yielded a higher outcome, but in the end, we took a prudent approach to highlight reasonable targets and a feasible capacity for new housing in the South Coast community of Isla Vista. The overarching objective was to identify the most practical and predictable sites, and at the same time honor the community-based spirit of the Isla Vista Master Plan, as well as the tenets and prescription of state law. So moving forward from here, both the amendment and the Focused Rezone program based on state HCD's directives must follow a tightly coordinated schedule. As you can see by the timeline that's up on the screen, the county is operating under a state-mandated deadline for board approval of the IV Master Plan Capacity Amendment by the 15th of September of this year, and a completion of the rezone program prior to the end of this calendar year. As you can see here, with respect to the Focused Rezone program, we'll be before you again soon, requesting recommendation to the board to complete the final actions necessary to complete our 2003-2008 housing element cycle in early October. So in summary, our staff report requests the following actions recommendations. First, a recommendation that the board adopt an addendum to the original housing element negative declaration and related findings expressing that the information provided in this amendment is informational only. Second, recommendation of adoption of the Planning Commission resolution recommending that the board adopt an amendment to the housing element by inserting a new section entitled Section 7, the Isla Vista Master Plan Land Inventory and Housing Capacity, along with a new Appendix E1 consisting of the complementary tables and figures that support the new Section 7 addition to the housing element. That concludes our presentation, and with that, with me, Senior Planner Chris Rich, who's been a constant aid in producing a highly technical analysis over this last year. So we're happy to answer any questions that you have.
Okay. Any commissioner questions for staff at this point?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I have a question.
Go ahead, Commissioner Valencia.
Thank you. The remaining shortfall of the 370 units, are they in any way mentioned in this amendment? Mr. Mattson?
Chair Jackson, Commissioner Valencia, they are mentioned within the context of what is left over after Isla Vista is placed into our housing element inventory. Those 370 units are discussed in the context of the staff report and the amendment as units that will be made up during the completion of the focused rezone program. And as your commission is aware, the county has released a notice of preparation of an EIR. We held a scoping hearing. We also just released the draft environmental impact report. Next Tuesday, we'll be holding an environmental hearing to discuss the analysis that is in that EIR, and then we'll be bringing forward a final EIR for consideration and recommendation to the Planning Commission in October. Now that EIR covers and is based upon sites that were selected by the Planning Commission back in 2005, in November of 2005, and again in May of 2006. And at that time, the Planning Commission recommended a number of sites, and those are the sites that formed the basis for the pool of sites that would be considered to make up that remaining shortfall.
Mr. Mattson, I received an executive summary titled Project Synopsis by Ms. Hofschmidt, Deputy Director, concerning the housing element. And in that, it focuses on 3 key sites, Key Site 30 and Key Site 3. Are any of those sites mentioned in your amendment?
None of those sites are mentioned in our amendment. That is on a separate track and will go through a full public process and hearing process. So there is no relationship to the sites discussed in the draft EIR from this amendment.
All right, thank you.
Okay. I'm going to go through, before we take any additional questions, the audience is huge and demanding an opportunity to speak, but they have not turned in any speaker slips. I will invite speaker slips. I don't see any, so we'll bring it back to the commission.
Mr. Chairman, we had one speaker slip that we faxed out from here, and we have a lady been patiently waiting for the last hour to speak, so.
Okay, super. I bet I have it. In fact, I do. Would that be Ms. Jack? Is that correct?
Yes. Well, go ahead. If it's been addressed, you can
Please,
say so.
go right ahead. Thank you.
I'm Morgan Taylor Jack, and I live in Lompoc.
Wait a second.
I've never gotten
Can you hear her?
Yes, we
Can
can.
you hear me?
Okay, great, thank you.
This actually may be a moot question now. If those 370 units are not really going to be addressed at this time, and I...
That was a drift that I got from the Deputy Director. However, they are on my mind, too.
should I address this now, or should I wait for the...
It's going to come up later, it's another hearing, is what they were
All
talking
right,
about.
then I will cut to the chase. I wanted to address one paragraph of a public comment letter that was posted on the Planning Commission website on August the 25th, where the writer discusses Alternative 1 to the proposed key sites, which are Key Site 3 and Key Site 30 in the Orchid area. Alternative 1, she said, was, quote, the most environmentally superior alternative when location is addressed, end quotes. I'd like to clarify that, not just for the sake of clarification, but also to make sure that the writer and I are on the same page. Alternative 1 encompasses 9.2 acres in Vandenberg Village in Lompoc, which would include 184 multifamily residential units, and the Caltrans site includes 9.3 acres near Mission Hills, Lompoc, for 186 units. Now, the executive summary of the Focused Rezone Program Draft EIR clearly states on page ES3 that Alternative 4, which is the alternative rezone site location on Key Site 3 in the Orchid area, quote, has been identified as the most environmentally superior alternative among the development alternatives, end quote. Specifically, I would like to show that the Caltrans site, which is a right-of-way at the corners of Burton Mesa Boulevard and Harris Gray Road just north of Lompoc, is not a good location for multi-use housing.
Excuse me.
One, incompatibility with the rural setting. It is contiguous to 5,200 acres of the Burton Mesa Ecological Reserve. It is too far away from shopping, health services, and available jobs. The drive to Lompoc alone is a minimum of 2 miles. Traffic impacts. Though rural in setting, there are nearby existing residential communities with thousands of cars daily converging at these Caltrans corners and the junction of Highway 1 and Casmalia Highway less than a mile away. These are all 2-lane highways. A residential development of up to 476 units has already been approved that will add to the area congestion. But the most important reason, however, is that the Caltrans property should not even be on the housing element. Now, I know it was put on the housing element before the negotiations with the Department of Fish and Game.
Excuse me, ma'am. I
Yes.
think we may have a problem in that we're talking about 2 different subjects. And our hearing officer, Ms. Black here, I think would like to make a comment that may help keep us focused on what we're doing today. Ms. Black.
Mr. Chair, and I certainly can appreciate the confusion that the public...
Could you speak up, because we can't hear you at all?
Mr. Chair, I understand the confusion the public speaker might have. There are 2 separate items running in almost a parallel track on the housing element. The first is the item that we're discussing today, which is simply to incorporate the actions previously taken by the county on the Isla Vista Master Plan into the housing element so that the number of units that we need to plan for quickly is quite a bit less. The second item is the planning for the items that remain, and that's, I think, what you're speaking to today. That's actually not on our agenda today. You'll have an opportunity to present oral comments if you'd like on September 3rd, and I believe that hearing is in Santa Maria at the same place you're at now. What time is it?
Actually out there.
It starts at 5, so you're welcome to come and testify as to the EIR. You can provide written comments up until October 3rd, and then the Planning Commission is actually scheduled to take up the sites issue that you're speaking of right now on October 17th in the same location that you're at now, starting at 9 o'clock in the morning. So I hope that helps.
Yes, it does. Thank you very much for your time.
And in defense of, Mr. Chair, in defense of Ms. Jack, in the staff report on 5.1.3, it does mention these 370 units, and it makes mention of the Orchid community area in the Lompoc area. And that's the part that's got all these folks in the Lompoc Orchid area excited about this, because in the past 4 years, we've approved 11 development projects, 11 tracts totaling somewhere in the neighborhood of 1,000 homes in the Orchid area. And they're very concerned because 20% of those or more were affordable, and now this 370 are being considered, according to the report, for the Keyside 3 and 30. And I know that it was just general information, but they're excited about that because the jobs are in the Goleta, Santa Barbara area, and that's the area that you should be focusing on.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner, and if she's still there, please thank her. Her points are well taken and will be listened to on the date when the subject is before us. I'll ask now if commissioners have any questions for staff with regard to this. Otherwise, I'm going to be prepared to seek a motion on the portion of the subject we have before us today. Is there any further questions? Commissioner Blau or Commissioner Valencia?
No, but I will make the motion that you're asking. I will say so moved.
Okay. We have a motion and a second to accept the staff report, staff recommendations to facilitate what has been presented today. Is there any further discussion?
Mr. Chair, I just have one question of staff, and have you received, other than Ms. Smith's letter, any community comment or input?
Chair Jackson and Commissioner Brown, We did receive one other public comment letter. It was also related to the rezone sites program, the focused rezone program. We have not received any public comment or input to date on the amendment proposed today.
Okay, then we have a motion and a second on the floor. Ms. Oplett?
Commissioner Brown?
Aye.
Commissioner Blau?
Aye.
Commissioner Cooney?
Aye.
Commissioner Valencia?
Aye.
Commissioner Jackson?
Aye.
Vote carries 5-0.
Okay, thank you
I
very
have
much.
one last issue, if I could. It relates back to the calendar,
Okay,
if I could.
please go ahead.
I understand that there's a little problem with Rice Branch Road, and I understand that we're trying to set a hearing up for the September 24th. I'm just curious if it's possible to get that moved to September 10th.
Mr. Chair and Commissioner Blau, we don't have enough time to notice that item, is my understanding. We haven't even received the second application yet, and we just don't have time to notice it and get a staff report together.
What's the minimum time for noticing? Maybe you could explain the noticing provisions to me.
Yes, Mr. Chair and Commissioner Blau, the minimum time for noticing is 10 days, but it needs to be in the paper 10 days in advance of the hearing. Pardon? So we would have to get that in the paper by tomorrow.
Okay, you know what, I understand, I'm glad for that. I did a little meeting with, in county planning here at Foster Road in about 15 minutes. Diane, could you call me after 2:30 on my cell phone? I can talk to you about this issue privately. Is that possible?
Sure.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, are there any additional housekeeping we need to, Commissioner Cooney?
Just one more issue. I think we need to discuss the benefits and detriments of remote participation in hearings, just as a general matter. I worry about the lack of communication among commissioners and our effectiveness. I can understand it when we have short agendas, but some of the items today have, I think they would benefit from us all being in the same room. So I just want to mark it as something to discuss among ourselves at a future meeting, and hopefully it will be the exception rather than the rule that we're participating in different locations.
If I could, I agree with that. Quite frankly, the reason that we did this today was that I really had guessed that this would take about an hour and a half to go through. It was scheduled for 2.5 hours, but the one issue was something we decided was a second hearing, and one issue was a consent item, and another issue was David Mattson. So we were trying to save the money for county from paying us for driving back and forth. But I agree. I only want to do it if it's going to be really short meetings and somewhat non-controversial issues.
And Mr. Chair, I think that we need to take care in canceling all the meetings that we're canceling. I notice now that we're going to put another meeting on to the wind energy project. And that wind energy project is a very important project in my area. And from what I hear, there's going to be a lot of people involved in it. You never know. And then starting to put other projects in there so that we hear them first might curtail the time that we have there. So just a caution is be careful before canceling meetings at the meeting, I think, is a bad idea. I think you have the discretion to discuss that at length with the staff prior to the meeting, and I think that's when it should be done. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chair and members of the commission, just for clarification, I think what we've decided today, and I just want to make sure all the commissioners understand this, is we will continue to have the Lompoc Wind Energy Project heard on September 30th, which is a Tuesday, in Santa Maria, and we will continue to have the South County hearing on October 1st, that very following day in Santa Barbara. So we did not
change.
We did not combine them because on the last permit item that we heard, we actually continued that item to October 1st in Santa Barbara. So we'll have the whole day, Commissioner Valencia.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
Sure.
Okay. I believe, unless there is any additional housekeeping, we are prepared to adjourn. So be it. Thank you very much.
Those remaining 370, I don't want to see them.